Story 1.
I haven't slept more than 3 consecutive hours in 11 months. That's not an exaggeration. That's not the kind of thing tired moms say to get sympathy at the pediatrician's office. I mean it literally. 11 months of fractured sleep, of waking to my daughter, screaming like something was tearing her apart from the inside. And everyone, my husband, my doctor, my mother-in-law, kept telling me it was normal. Toddlers have nightmares. Toddlers go through phases. But here's the thing about being a mother running on fumes. Your logic gets foggy, sure. But your instincts get sharper. Almost animal. And my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I just didn't know the something was a person I was supposed to trust. My daughter Lily turned 2 in March. She was a happy baby, the kind strangers smile at in grocery stores. Easygoing. Curious. Laughed at everything. But somewhere around last fall, she started changing. Not dramatically at first. She'd cling to me a little harder at bedtime. Then she started crying when I'd leave the room. Then came the night terrors, full body, rigid eyes, open screaming that no amount of holding could fix. My husband Marcus said it was developmental. His mother Diane said I was coddling her. And I was too exhausted to argue with either of them. Diane had been babysitting every Thursday since Lily was 4 months old. It was her idea, pitched as a gift. You need a break, sweetheart. Let me take my grandbaby for the day. And at first, it was a gift. I'd sleep. I'd clean the house without a toddler on my hip. I'd feel human again for 6 hours. But I started noticing things. Small things. My filing cabinet slightly ajar when I came home. A drawer in my bedroom that I always kept locked sitting unlocked. Papers on my desk rearranged in ways I couldn't quite prove, but could feel. And Lily. Lily was always different on Thursday nights. Quieter. Clingy in a way that felt like fear, not affection. She'd grab my shirt and whisper no-go over and over until she fell asleep. I told Marcus. He said I was sleep-deprived and paranoid. He said his mother had raised 3 kids and had never so much as raised her voice. He said I needed to see a therapist, not accuse his family. So I stopped talking to Marcus about it. And I bought a nanny cam. 2 of them, actually. One disguised as a stuffed elephant on Lily's bookshelf. One built into a digital clock I placed on the kitchen counter. I set them up on a Wednesday night while Marcus was at a work dinner and Diane was blissfully unaware. The next morning, Thursday, I kissed Lily goodbye, told Diane there were snacks in the fridge, and drove to a coffee shop 6 minutes away. I sat in a parking lot with my laptop open and the live feed running. And I watched. For the first hour, everything was normal. Diane played with Lily, read her a book, made her lunch. I almost felt guilty. Almost closed the laptop and drove to Target like I usually did. Then, Lily went down for her nap. The second Diane heard the white noise machine click on through the monitor, she moved. Not casually, purposefully. She went straight to our bedroom, pulled a key from her purse, a key I had never given her, and opened my filing cabinet. She pulled out our tax returns, our bank statements, Marcus's pay stubs, my medical records from when I was treated for postpartum anxiety. She photographed every single page with her phone. Methodically. Front and back. She even adjusted the lighting on one document to get a clearer shot. This was not the first time she had done this. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't look over her shoulder. She moved like someone executing a routine. Then she put everything back, locked the cabinet, returned the key to her purse, and went to check on Lily. What happened next is the part I still can't talk about without my chest tightening. Lily was awake, sitting up in her crib, quiet, watching the door. Diane leaned over the railing and started talking to her in this low, steady voice. Almost soothing. Almost sweet. She said, "Mommy and Daddy are going to go away soon, sweetheart." but Grandma's going to take care of you. Grandma's always going to be here. You don't need to be scared. They're going to go away, but Grandma won't. My 2-year-old daughter stared up at her grandmother and started to cry. Not a tantrum cry. A terrified, silent cry. The kind where the mouth opens but nothing comes out at first. And Diane picked her up and shushed her and said, "See, this is why you need Grandma. Mommy can't help you. Mommy's sick." I sat in that parking lot and I shook so hard I couldn't hold my coffee. I watched the screen blur through tears I didn't even realize were falling. I drove home. I don't remember the drive. I walked through the front door and Diane looked up from the couch where she was holding my daughter and she smiled at me. That same warm grandmother smile. And I smiled back. Because I knew something she didn't know. I knew I had every second of it recorded in high definition with a timestamp. I let 3 more Thursdays pass. I know that sounds insane. I know people will judge me for that. But I needed more than one recording. I needed a pattern. I needed evidence that no judge, no lawyer, no husband could dismiss as a one-time lapse in judgment. And every Thursday, Diane delivered. She searched different drawers. She found and photographed our life insurance policy. She found the password notebook I kept in my nightstand, the one with our bank logins. She whispered the same poison into my daughter's ear every single time. Variations on a theme. Mommy's going away. Daddy doesn't love you enough. Only Grandma is safe. On the 3rd Thursday, she brought a folder from her own purse and I watched her compare our financial documents to something she'd already printed out. I zoomed in on the feed later. They were custody petition templates, downloaded from a Colorado family law website, with blanks already filled in. She was building a case. She was documenting our finances, my mental health history, our schedules. She was psychologically conditioning my toddler to be afraid of her own parents so that when the time came when she filed, Lily would cling to her in front of a social worker and it would look like proof. I had 72 hours of footage. I called a family attorney before I told Marcus. The attorney watched 20 minutes of the recordings, went quiet, and then said, "This is one of the most calculated things I've seen in 15 years of practice." She told me to file for a restraining order. She told me to change every lock in the house. She told me to document Lily's behavioral changes with our pediatrician immediately. Then she asked if my husband was involved. I said no. I said he'd never believe it. She looked at me and said, "He's going to have to." I showed Marcus the footage on a Sunday night after Lily was asleep. I didn't say anything first. I just opened the laptop, pressed play, and sat next to him. He watched his mother unlock our filing cabinet with a key she'd apparently copied. He watched her photograph our tax returns. He watched her lean over our daughter's crib and tell a 2-year-old that her parents were going to abandon her. And then he closed the laptop. Gently. Like it was something fragile. And he said, "There has to be a context we're missing." I felt something break inside me that wasn't sadness. It was the last thread of patience I had been holding on to for 11 months of sleepless nights and gaslighting and watching my daughter deteriorate. I said, "Marcus, your mother is stealing our financial information and terrorizing our child to build a custody case against us. There is no missing context." He said I was overreacting. He said his mother probably just wanted to help with our finances. He said maybe she was just reassuring Lily in a clumsy way. I said, "She has custody petition templates in her purse, Marcus, with our names on them." He went quiet for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. Right there. In front of me. And he told her what I'd found. Diane didn't deny it. That's the part that still haunts me. She didn't even try. She said, and I will never forget these words, "I'm doing what's best for that child because neither of you are capable." She said, "My anxiety made me an unfit mother." She She said Marcus was too passive to protect his own daughter. She said she'd been consulting with an attorney for 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of Thursdays. Of smiling at me while she dismantled my family from the inside. Marcus hung up the phone and didn't speak to me for 2 days. The restraining order was granted on a Tuesday. Diane is prohibited from contacting Lily or coming within 500 feet of our home. Her copied key was confiscated. Our locks were changed. Our financial accounts were frozen and reopened with new credentials. Lily started seeing a child psychologist who specializes in emotional manipulation in young children. After 3 sessions, the psychologist told me that what Diane had done was a textbook form of psychological abuse, deliberately destabilizing a child's attachment to their parents to create dependency on the abuser. My daughter wasn't having night terrors because of a developmental phase. She was having them because her grandmother was systematically teaching her that her parents were going to disappear. Marcus and I are still married. But something between us is broken in a way I don't know how to fix. He goes through the motions. He agreed to the restraining order. He stopped speaking to his mother. But he looks at me sometimes like I'm the one who destroyed something. Like I'm the one who detonated the bomb instead of the person who found it before it went off. His brother called me last week and said I'd torn their family apart. His father sent a letter saying Diane meant well. Lily sleeps through the night now. 5 straight hours last Tuesday. She woke up, looked at me and said, "Mama, here?" Not a question. A statement. Like she was confirming something she'd been afraid to believe. I held her so tight she squirmed. And I whispered back, "Mama's here. Mama's not going anywhere. I don't regret the cameras. I don't regret the restraining order. I don't regret any of it. But I will never forgive myself for every Thursday I handed my daughter to that woman and drove away. And I will never stop wondering how close she came to pulling it off."
Story 2.
I spent 41 years measuring land for a living. 41 years walking property lines, reading deeds, driving stakes into dirt, and telling people exactly where their world ended and someone else's began. So when I tell you I know where my property line sits, understand that I don't mean it the way most people do. I don't mean I have a general sense. I mean I could walk it blindfolded at midnight and plant a flag within a 1/4 inch of the iron pin. That's why what Dale Puckett did to me wasn't just theft. It was an insult. I retired in 2019. Bought 23 acres outside Waynesboro, Tennessee, Lawrence County, right where the hills start folding into each other like knuckles. The place had a 1940s farmhouse, a good well, and silence so deep you could hear your own blood moving. My wife Carol had passed 2 years before. I wasn't looking for a fresh start. I was looking for a place to be still. And for about 14 months, that's exactly what I got. Then Dale moved in next door. He bought the adjacent parcel, 30 acres, in March of 2021. At first, I thought he was running a small hobby kennel. A few dogs, some fencing, nothing to lose sleep over. But by summer, the barking was constant. Not a few dogs. Dozens. He was running a commercial breeding operation, French bulldogs from what I could tell, and he was scaling fast. New kennel buildings went up. Gravel pads got poured. Trucks started coming and going at all hours. I didn't love it, but it was his land. I minded my own business. Then one morning in October, I walked my east fence line the way I always did, coffee in hand, just checking things, and I stopped. The fence was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not obviously wrong. but wrong in the way that only a man who spent 4 decades measuring the earth would notice. The chain link fence Dale had installed along our shared boundary wasn't where the old post and wire fence had been. It was south, into my property. I eyeballed it at 6 to 8 feet, a strip running nearly 400 linear feet along the line. That's roughly 3,000 square feet of my land, just absorbed into his operation, like it had always been his. He'd even poured a concrete pad for a new kennel building that was sitting partially on my dirt. I walked over that afternoon, knocked on his door, kept it neighborly, told him I thought his fence crew might have made an error, that the line looked off, and I'd be happy to show him the survey markers. Dale leaned against his doorframe, arms crossed, and smiled at me. "Fence is where my guys put it," he said. "If you've got a problem, call the county." So I did. And that's when I learned how things actually work. When you're a 70-year-old man living alone in rural Tennessee. The county code enforcement office told me boundary disputes were civil matters. The zoning office confirmed Dale had pulled permits for agricultural structures, which in Lawrence County covers commercial breeding operations with almost no oversight. The sheriff's office said they couldn't get involved in a property line disagreement without a court order. Everyone was polite. Everyone was sympathetic. And every single one of them told me it was my problem to solve. Dale, meanwhile, had already started running dogs on the stolen strip. He knew exactly what he'd done. He was betting that a retired old man wouldn't have the energy or the money to fight him. He bet wrong. I pulled my original deed and survey from when I purchased the property. I confirmed every pin, every bearing, every distance. Then I hired a licensed surveyor, a younger guy I'd mentored years ago, and had him do a full boundary survey with GPS-corrected coordinates. The result was exactly what I knew it would be. Dale's fence encroached between 7 feet 8 inches and 8 feet 2 inches onto my parcel, along the entire shared boundary. His concrete pad for the new kennel sat 22 inches onto my land. I sent Dale a certified letter with the survey attached, demanding he remove the fence and structures within 30 days. He never responded. So I escalated. I bought a drone. Nothing fancy, a DJI Mini, perfectly legal for recreational use over my own property. I started documenting everything. The encroachment, the number of dogs, the waste runoff that was draining toward my pasture, the trucks coming at 2 and 3 in the morning. I logged dates, times, license plates. I photographed every square foot of that stolen strip from the air, time-stamped and geotagged. I built a file like I was prosecuting a federal case because I knew that when I finally walked into a courtroom, I was only going to get one clean shot. But the drone footage gave me something I hadn't expected. Dale's operation was bigger than what was visible from the road. He had over 60 dogs in various enclosures, many of them in conditions that would make your stomach turn. Stacked crates, standing water, dogs that hadn't seen a veterinarian in God knows how long. I reported it to animal control. They did an inspection, cited him for minor violations, and gave him 60 days to correct. He corrected just enough to pass a follow-up. The system was designed to give people like Dale every possible chance. While I waited for my attorney to file the boundary action, I did something else. Something that changed everything. I went to the Lawrence County Register of Deeds and pulled the complete chain of title for both properties going back to their common origin. My parcel and Dale's had been part of the same farm until 1946, when the original owner subdivided and sold them separately. And in that 1946 deed, the one that created Dale's parcel, there was a restrictive covenant. It was one sentence buried in the legal description, written in the kind of language nobody uses anymore. It said the property was conveyed subject to the condition that it be used solely for residential and traditional agricultural purposes, and that any commercial enterprise conducted on the premises would constitute a violation entitling the grantor or his successors and assigns to pursue all available remedies, including forfeiture. I read that sentence 11 times. Then I called my attorney. Now, deed covenants from the 1940s don't always hold up. Courts have relaxed enforcement of many of them over the decades, especially ones tied to racial restrictions or outdated land use concepts. But this one was different. It was a clear, specific use restriction tied to the character of the land, and Tennessee courts have consistently upheld those when they run with the land, and subsequent buyers have constructive notice, which Dale did because the covenant was recorded in his chain of title. He either didn't read his deed, or he didn't think anyone would ever find it. Either way, it was his problem now. My attorney filed 2 actions simultaneously. The first was a straightforward boundary encroachment suit, seeking removal of the fence and structure's damages for trespass and an injunction. The second was an action to enforce the restrictive covenant seeking to shut down the commercial breeding operation entirely. Dale hired a lawyer out of Columbia. They filed an answer claiming the covenant was abandoned and unenforceable due to changed conditions in the area. The judge didn't buy it. The area hadn't changed. It was still rural, residential, and small-scale agricultural, exactly as it had been in 1946. There were no other commercial operations within a mile. Dale's own real estate listing when he bought the property described it as a quiet rural homestead. His own purchase documents undermined his defense. The court ruled in my favor on both counts. Dale was ordered to remove the encroaching fence and all structures from my property within 45 days. He was ordered to pay damages for the trespass and my survey and legal costs. And the court enforced the restrictive covenant ordering him to cease all commercial breeding operations on the property. That last part is what broke him. His entire investment, the kennel, buildings, the infrastructure, the breeding stock, the business he'd built, was predicated on operating from that location. Without it, he had nothing but 30 acres of land with buildings he couldn't legally use. He tried to appeal. His attorney advised him the chances were slim and the costs would be enormous. Within 3 months, Dale put the property up for sale. But here's the thing about selling land with an active restrictive covenant limiting it to residential and traditional agricultural use, it's not worth what you paid for it. Not even close. He sold at a loss. A significant loss. The new buyers are a young couple who raise goats and keep to themselves. The fence is back where it belongs. The concrete pad is gone. The dogs were rehomed through a rescue organization that got involved after my drone footage made its way to the right people. I sit on my porch now in the evenings and it's quiet again. The kind of quiet Carol would have loved. People ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Dale. If I think I went too far. I measured land for 41 years. I know exactly how far is too far. Dale went 8 feet past it.
Story 3.
My sister looked me dead in the eye across that courtroom and swore on our dead father's name that I'd stolen what was rightfully hers. And the worst part, half the people in that room believed her. My name's Daniel. I'm 31 years old. I sort letters at the Royal Mail Depot in Crookston, Leeds. I wake up at 4 in the morning, I eat my lunch alone in the break room, and I go home to a 1-bedroom flat above a kebab shop on Burley Road. That's my life. That was my life. Until a solicitor in Harrogate rang me on a Tuesday afternoon and told me my father was dead. I hadn't spoken to my dad in 6 years. He left when I was 12, moved to Harrogate with a woman named Pauline, and slowly became someone I didn't know anymore. He'd call on birthdays for a while. Then he stopped. My sister Karen, she's 8 years older than me, she kept in touch with him. Or so she told me. She was always the one who'd say, "Dad asks about you," or "Dad's not well, you should ring him." I never did. And now I never could. The solicitor, a man called Mr. Hepworth, told me something that didn't make any sense. My father had left me everything. A property portfolio. 4 rental houses in Harrogate and a converted barn in Nidderdale. Total value roughly £2.3 million. I actually laughed. I thought it was a scam. I told Mr. Hepworth I needed to call him back, and then I sat on the edge of my bed for 20 minutes staring at the wall. When I told Karen, she went quiet. Not surprised, quiet. Calculating, quiet. I know the difference now. Within a week, she was at my flat with a folder. She sat at my kitchen table and spread out papers, printouts, handwritten notes. What she said were copies of letters between her and Dad. She told me there'd been a mistake. That Dad had always intended the properties to go to her. That she'd been managing them for years, collecting rent, handling repairs, keeping the whole thing running while Dad's health declined. She said the will was outdated, that Dad had drafted a newer one but never got it witnessed properly. She said I needed to sign the properties over to her, or at least agree to split them, because anything else would be, her exact word, grotesque. I told her I needed time to think. She didn't like that. 2 days later, I got a call from a debt recovery firm claiming my father owed £38,000 to a private lender. Then another call about an outstanding tax bill on one of the Harrogate properties. Then a letter hand-delivered to my flat from a man I'd never heard of, claiming Dad had verbally promised him the barn in Nidderdale in exchange for care work. All of it, every single piece of it, led back to Karen. I didn't figure that out immediately. I'm not clever like her, but Mr. Hepworth was. He told me the debt recovery firm was connected to a company Karen's husband ran. The tax bill had already been settled 2 years prior. Karen had just recycled the paperwork. And the man claiming the barn, he was Karen's ex-boyfriend's brother. It was all fabricated. Every document, every claim, every tearful phone call she made to our cousins telling them I was stealing from her. She filed a caveat with the probate court. That meant everything froze. No inheritance, no access, nothing. And then she submitted what she claimed was a later will, one that left everything to her. Mr. Hepworth had a handwriting expert examine it within the week. The signature was forged. Not even a particularly good forgery. She'd traced it from a birthday card. But Karen didn't stop. She weaponized the family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions. Karen told them I'd abandoned Dad, that I didn't deserve a penny, that I was a selfish loner who only showed up when there was money involved. My Aunt Denise left me a voicemail calling me a disgrace. My cousin Paul sent me a Facebook message saying I should be ashamed of myself. None of them had any idea what Karen had actually been doing. None of them asked me for my side. I started going through Dad's records. Mr. Hepworth had given me access to the boxes of paperwork found in Dad's house. Bank statements, letters, receipts, notebooks. I spent every evening after my shift sitting on the floor of my flat reading through the life of a man I barely knew. And that's when I found the real story. Dad had kept a journal. Not every day, sometimes weeks would pass between entries, but enough. Enough to piece together what happened. Karen had been siphoning rent money from the properties for at least 4 years. She'd set up a separate bank account, redirected tenant payments, and told Dad the properties were underperforming. She convinced him to give her power of attorney when he was first diagnosed with vascular dementia. She used it to take out a loan against one of the Harrogate houses. £45,000. Dad never saw a penny of it. But here's the part that broke me. Dad found out. 18 months before he died, he found out everything. One of the tenants contacted him directly about a rent increase. Karen had imposed money that was going straight into her account. Dad confronted her. And according to his journal, Karen told him that if he made trouble, she'd put him in a care home and never visit. She told him no one else cared about him. She told him I'd never come. And for a while, he believed her. But then he went to a solicitor. Quietly. On his own. He revoked Karen's power of attorney. He changed his will. He left everything to me, not because he thought I was a better person, but because he knew Karen would strip it all away if she got the chance. He wrote in his journal, "Daniel doesn't know me, but he's honest. Karen knows me too well, and she's not. The last 6 months of his life, he was alone. Karen had stopped visiting once she realized she'd lost control. Pauline had died 2 years earlier. Dad had carers coming in 3 times a day. And he sat in that house in Harrogate with his notebooks and his tea, and he waited. He wrote about the garden. He wrote about a cat that kept visiting his back step. He wrote about wishing he'd been a better father. He wrote about me. I sat on my kitchen floor and I cried until my chest hurt. For a man I hadn't spoken to in 6 years, for a man I'd convinced myself didn't care, for a man my sister had isolated and exploited and then abandoned when he stopped being useful. The probate hearing lasted 2 days. Karen showed up with a solicitor she couldn't afford and a story she couldn't sustain. She presented her forged will. She presented the fabricated debts. She presented 3 character witnesses, family members who admitted under cross-examination that everything they knew about the situation had come from Karen. Mr. Hepworth presented the handwriting analysis. He presented Dad's bank records, showing the siphoned rent. He presented the revoked power of attorney, and he presented the journal. Karen's solicitor asked for an adjournment. The judge denied it. When the ruling came down, the judge didn't just validate Dad's will. He referred Karen's forged documents to the police. He used the word systematic. He used the word predatory. He said my father had been the victim of financial abuse by his own daughter and that the court had a duty to name it plainly. Karen didn't look at me when it was over. She walked out of that courtroom with her husband, got into their car, and drove away. I haven't heard from her since. I've heard from Aunt Denise, though. She rang to apologize. I let it go to voicemail. I own those properties now. 4 houses in Harrogate and a barn in Nidderdale. I've kept the same letting agent Dad used. I still work at the depot 3 days a week because I don't know what else to do with my mornings. Last weekend, I drove to Dad's house. I sat in his kitchen. I found the back step where the cat used to visit. I sat there for an hour in the quiet and I tried to know him. I think he'd have liked that. I think that might have been enough.
Story 4.
I trusted my neighbor for 11 years. He came to our barbecues. He watched our kids grow up. He shook my hand every Sunday morning on his way to church. Bible tucked under his arm, that warm smile spread across his face like butter on toast. And every single one of those mornings before the sun came up, he'd already been inside my garage, helping himself, taking whatever he wanted. My name is Craig. I'm 43 years old, and I live, or lived, depending on how you look at it, on a quiet cul-de-sac in North Leeds. The kind of street where people still wave at each other, where you leave a parcel on someone's step if they're not home, where you don't lock everything down because you think you don't need to. I was wrong about that. It started small. So small I felt stupid even noticing. A socket wrench set I could have sworn I left on the workbench. A half-full jerry can of petrol that seemed emptier than it should have been. An Amazon package that tracking said was delivered but wasn't on the porch when I got home. My wife Laura told me I was losing it. You're 43, Craig, not 23. You forget things. And I believed her. For weeks, I believed her. But then my cordless drill vanished. A Makita. Brand new. Still in the box. I'd bought it on a Saturday, and by Monday morning it was gone. That's not forgetting. That's something else entirely. I mentioned it casually to my neighbor Malcolm. Malcolm Priestley. 61 years old, retired civil servant, sang in the church choir, kept his hedges trimmed to military precision. I said, Mal, you haven't seen anyone poking around the garages, have you? I've had a few bits go missing. He shook his head slowly, furrowed his brow like he was genuinely concerned. That's terrible, Craig. Might be those lads from the estate. Want me to keep an eye out? I thanked him. I actually thanked him. Laura thought I was overreacting when I ordered the cameras. 2 small ones, one for the driveway, one inside the garage tucked behind a shelf where you'd never spot them. Wireless motion-activated feeding straight to an app on my phone. Cost me about 90 quid. Best money I ever spent. I set them up on a Thursday evening after dark. Didn't tell anyone. Not Laura, not the kids, not Malcolm. I wanted clean footage with no variables. Friday morning, I woke up at 6:30, made a coffee, and opened the app. There were 14 motion alerts, starting at 4:47 a.m. I tapped the first clip. The driveway camera showed a figure approaching from the left, from Malcolm's side of the fence. He was wearing a dark fleece and trainers. No torch. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He walked straight to my garage side door, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a key. A key. Not a crowbar, not a lockpick. A key. He opened the door, stepped inside, and the second camera caught him clear as day. He browsed my shelves like he was in a bloody supermarket. Picked up a tin of wood stain, examined it, put it back. Grabbed a box of screws. Took a tape measure. Checked the workbench drawers. Found a 20-pound note I'd left in a coffee tin and pocketed it without blinking. Then he left. Locked the door behind him. Walked back to his house. The whole thing took 11 minutes. I watched it 3 times. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something worse. From the feeling of realizing that the world you thought you lived in doesn't actually exist. I checked the previous nights. The camera had only been active since Thursday, so I only had the one recording. But the ease of it, the routine told me everything. This wasn't new. This was ritual. I didn't confront him that day. I wanted more. I needed to understand the scale of it. So I waited. Saturday morning, 4:51 a.m. There he was again. This time, he took a pair of secateurs and a half bottle of white spirit. Sunday, 4:44 a.m. He took nothing, just looked around like he was taking inventory. On Sunday afternoon, he knocked on my door holding a plate of scones his wife had baked. Janet's been on a baking spree, he said, laughing. I took the plate. I looked at his face. That smile. Those kind eyes. And I felt sick. Monday morning, I went to the police. They were interested, but not urgent. Told me to gather more footage, keep a log, don't confront him alone. Standard advice. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't sit across from this man at the next street barbecue and pretend I didn't know. So that evening, I walked over and knocked on his door. Janet answered. Lovely woman, always had been. Craig, come in, love, kettle's just boiled. I said I needed to speak to Malcolm. She called him down. He appeared at the top of the stairs in his slippers, reading glasses perched on his nose, looking every inch the harmless retiree. I didn't sit down. I stood in their hallway and I said, Malcolm, I put cameras in my garage. The glasses came off. Slowly. He folded them and held them in both hands like a man holding a small dead bird. I see, he said. I've got footage of you entering my garage at 4:45 in the morning. Multiple days. Using a key. Taking my things. Janet looked at him. Then at me. Then back at him. Malcolm, what's he talking about? He didn't deny it. That's what haunts me. He didn't even try. He just stood there on the 3rd step of his staircase and said very quietly, it got out of hand. Out of hand, I could hear my own voice cracking. You copied my garage key. When did you even get access to it? He looked at the floor. Years ago, you left your keys on the kitchen counter during a dinner party. I took an impression. Had one cut the next day. Janet sat down on the hallway bench like her legs had given out. She was white. Completely white. How long? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. I asked again, louder. How long, Malcolm? Since about 2 years after we moved in, he said. 11 years. My neighbor had been entering my garage for approximately 9 years. Regularly, methodically. Before dawn. While my family slept 20 feet away, I asked him why. I genuinely wanted to understand. Was it money? Was it compulsion? Was it some kind of illness? He looked up at me with those same kind eyes and said, I don't know, Craig. I liked having access. That sentence broke something in me. Not I needed the money, not I couldn't help myself. He liked having access to my things, to my space, to my life. Like it was a privilege he'd granted himself. I left without shouting. I didn't need to. The look on Janet's face was punishment enough for one evening. But here's where it gets worse. I told Laura. Laura told her friend Denise across the street. Denise told her husband Phil. Phil checked his own security footage from the week before. He'd installed cameras months ago after a separate suspicion about missing garden tools. Malcolm was on Phil's footage too. Different time. 5:15 a.m. Different garage. Same routine. Same calm, unhurried browsing. Within 48 hours, 4 households on our street had found footage of Malcolm entering their properties. 4. The Patels at number 12 found he'd been taking small amounts of diesel from their car, siphoning it, actually with a tube he apparently kept behind their own wheelie bin. The Hendersons discovered he'd been accessing their garden shed and had even moved a spare key they kept hidden under a pot. He knew where everyone hid everything. The police arrested him on Wednesday. He was cooperative. Polite, even. Admitted to everything in his interview, apparently. Gave a full account going back years. The officers told me, off the record, that they'd never seen anything quite like it. Not violent. Not overtly criminal in the dramatic sense. Just this quiet, systematic parasitism stretching back over a decade. He was charged with multiple counts of burglary and theft. Janet moved out within the month, went to stay with her sister in Harrogate. The house went up for sale by autumn. The street never recovered. Not really. People installed cameras, changed locks, added bolts. Neighbors who'd chatted freely for years now nodded curtly and went inside. The trust that made our little cul-de-sac feel like a community had been hollowed out from the inside slowly over years. We didn't even notice. I still think about what Malcolm said. I liked having access. That's the thing about trust. You give it freely because it costs you nothing. Till you find out someone's been spending it behind your back every single morning while you sleep.
Story 5.
I trusted my sister with my dead husband's money, and she fed it to a food truck. Let me say that again so it lands the way it landed on me. My sister, Denise, my blood, my best friend since we shared a bunk bed in Decatur, took $47,000 that was supposed to send my daughter to college, and she spent it on a rolling kitchen that sells overpriced jerk chicken out of a parking lot off Buford Highway. Every single cent of it. Gone. My husband Marcus died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that gives you a diagnosis and a countdown in the same sentence. He was 39. Our daughter Zoe was 15. He fought for 11 months, and then one Tuesday morning in November, he just stopped breathing while I was making coffee in the next room. I didn't even get to hold his hand. Marcus was careful. Meticulous. He had a $250,000 life insurance policy through his job at Delta. When it paid out, I was a wreck. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. I damn sure couldn't manage finances. So when Denise offered to help, she'd done bookkeeping for a dentist's office, she knew QuickBooks, she was family, I said yes without hesitating. I set up a separate account for Zoe's college fund. $47,000 earmarked and untouchable. I made Denise a co-signer so she could manage the account while I managed my grief. That was the worst decision of my life. Zoe got accepted to Spelman this past March. Full of joy, full of plans, already picking out dorm bedding. I was so proud I cried for 2 hours. Marcus would have been over the moon. I told her not to worry about money. Daddy took care of it. And then I logged into the account to start transferring funds for the first tuition installment. The balance was $1,211.43. I stared at the screen for so long and went to sleep. I refreshed it. I called the bank. I asked if there was an error. There was no error. Over the past 14 months, the account had been bled dry through a series of cashier's checks and electronic transfers, all authorized by the cosigner. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. I pulled the transaction history and started scrolling. $5,000 here. $3,000 there. $8,000 in one single withdrawal last October. The pays were a mix. Some went to a business account registered to something called D&R Flavor Co., LLC. Some went to an auto body shop. Some went to a name I recognized. Rodney Price. Denise's boyfriend of 2 years. A man who once borrowed $40 from me and never paid it back. I called Denise. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I texted her, "Call me now." "It's about Zoe's account." She texted back 20 minutes later, "Hey girl, super busy, what's up?" Like everything was normal. Like she hadn't hollowed out my daughter's future and used it as startup capital for her boyfriend's dream. I drove to her apartment in Smyrna. She opened the door in a bathrobe, smiling, and I walked past her into the kitchen and put my phone on the counter with the bank statement pulled up. I said, "Where is my daughter's money, Denise?" The smile dropped. Not all at once, it kind of slid off her face in stages like she was calculating how much I knew before deciding which lie to tell. "It's an investment," she said. That was her opening move. An investment. She said Rodney's food truck was about to take off. They'd been featured on some local blog. They had a catering contract lined up for a church in Marietta. She said the money would come back doubled. She said she was going to surprise me. I asked her when. When was this magical return on investment going to materialize? Because Zoe's first tuition payment was due in 9 weeks. 9 weeks, Denise! She started crying. And here's what kills me. For about 30 seconds, I almost felt bad for her. That's how deep the conditioning runs. She's my older sister. She protected me when we were kids. She held me at Marcus's funeral. My body wanted to comfort her, even while my brain was screaming that she'd stolen from my child. Rodney said it would work, she kept saying. He showed me the numbers. He promised. Rodney. A 44-year-old man who'd been fired from Waffle House, who drove a leased Dodge Charger he couldn't afford, who had Denise so wrapped around his finger that she'd commit financial fraud for him. I asked Denise, point blank, did Rodney know where the money came from? She wouldn't look at me. That was my answer. I lost it. Not screaming worse. I got quiet. I told her she stole from a dead man's daughter. I told her Marcus worked overtime for years so Zoe wouldn't have to take out loans, and she handed that sacrifice to a man who can't keep a job. I told her she was the one person I trusted after I lost everything, and she used that trust like a credit card. She grabbed my arm and said, "I'm your sister. I would never hurt you on purpose." I pulled away. "You didn't do this by accident, Denise. You wrote checks. You made transfers. You did it 14 times. Over 14 months. That's not a mistake. That's a plan." She begged me not to go to the police. She said it would destroy the family. She said our mother would never recover. She said give Rodney 6 months and he'd pay it all back. 6 months. Zoe's tuition was due in 9 weeks. Spellman doesn't take IOUs from food truck entrepreneurs. I left her apartment and sat in my car in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I called my mother. I told her everything. She was silent for a long time, and then she said something that broke me all over again. "I wish you hadn't told me that." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "That's wrong." She wished I'd kept it to myself. Because now she'd have to choose sides, and choosing sides meant losing a daughter, either way. I went home and told Zoe. She deserved to know. She sat on her bed with her Spellman acceptance letter pinned to the corkboard behind her, and she didn't cry. She just nodded slowly like she was absorbing a blow she'd been half expecting her whole life, the universe taking something good away the way it took her father. That look on my 17-year-old daughter's face, that resignation, that's what made my decision for me. I filed a police report the next morning. I hired a lawyer that afternoon, a woman named Tasha, who specialized in financial fraud and didn't flinch when I told her the thief was my sister. I also contacted Spellman's financial aid office, explained my situation, and begged for an extension. They gave me one. 12 weeks instead of 9. Denise called me 19 times that week. I answered once. She screamed at me. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said I was choosing money over blood. I said, "No, Denise, you did that. I'm just filling out the paperwork." Rodney's food truck, by the way, failed. Shut down 6 weeks after I filed the report. Health code violations and a lease he couldn't pay. $47,000 gone into cooking equipment that got repossessed. A truck wrap that's now peeling in a storage lot, and rent for a commissary kitchen he used for 4 months. My lawyer got a judgment against Denise for the full amount plus legal fees. She doesn't have it. Rodney certainly doesn't have it. We've started garnishment proceedings, which means I'll get it back in small, humiliating installments over the next several years. Zoe started at Spellman this fall. I took out a parent loan to cover the gap. It'll take me a decade to pay off. I work nights now on top of my day job sorting packages at a UPS hub, so the interest doesn't eat me alive. My mother still talks to Denise. She still talks to me. But she talks to us separately now, like we're two halves of a broken plate she keeps in different drawers. Thanksgiving is coming up and nobody's mentioned it. Denise sent me a text last week. It said, "I'm sorry. I love you. Can we talk?" I read it. I put my phone down. And I went to my second job. Some debts don't get repaid with money. And some family bonds aren't bonds at all. They're just habits you haven't broken yet.
Story 6.
I spent 41 years surveying land in East Tennessee. 41 years walking property lines, driving stakes, reading the earth like a book most people don't even know exists. So when I tell you I know where my property ends and my neighbor's begins, I need you to understand that's not an opinion. That's a fact, carved into the bedrock of everything I am. I retired in 2021. Bought a nice 3-acre parcel outside Greeneville, up against the foothills. Quiet place. Old hardwoods, a creek that runs year-round, a view of the Smokies from my back porch that makes you forget the world's gone sideways. My wife Carol, she passed 2 years before, and I wanted somewhere I could just be still. Just exist for a while, without anyone needing anything from me. I got about 14 months of that peace. Then Trent Ballard moved in next door. Now Ballard wasn't some regular guy buying a house. He was a developer. Had his fingers in half the residential projects in Greene County. Built subdivisions, flipped commercial lots, sat on the planning commission for 6 years before term limits finally pushed him out. The kind of man who shakes your hand while his other hand is in your back pocket. He bought the adjacent property in March of 2022 and immediately started renovating. Tore out the old landscaping, brought in heavy equipment, started grading the backyard. I didn't think much of it at first. Man's got a right to improve his own land. But then one morning in June, I walked my property line the way I always do, old habits, and I stopped dead. The chain link fence that had separated our properties for at least 20 years had been pulled up and reset. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just 8 feet further onto my side. 8 feet doesn't sound like much until you realize it runs 160 feet along the back boundary. That's nearly 1,300 square feet of my land. And right there, on what was now supposedly his side, concrete forms were already going in for a pool deck. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I went to talk to him first. I'm not unreasonable. I walked over, knocked on his door, told him calmly that his fence was off the mark. He smiled at me the way you smile at a confused old dog. Told me I must be mistaken. Said he'd had the property surveyed before closing and everything was exactly where it should be. Then he offered me a beer like that was going to make it all go away. I declined the beer. I went home and pulled out my own copy of the plat I'd reviewed before I bought my place. Clear as day, the boundary was where I knew it was. 8 feet from where his new fence sat. So the next morning I drove to the Greene County Register of Deeds to pull the original plat records. They weren't there. The clerk, a young woman who seemed genuinely confused, told me the file for my parcel's subdivision plat had been checked out and never returned. No record of who took it, no sign-out sheet, just gone. I asked about the digital backup. She said the system had been migrated 2 years prior and some older records hadn't transferred correctly. Now, a normal person might have panicked. Might have hired a lawyer right then and started throwing money at the problem. But I'm not a normal person. I'm a surveyor. And a surveyor doesn't panic when records go missing. A surveyor goes deeper. I started with the state archives in Nashville. Took me a full day's drive and 3 hours in a basement that smelled like mildew and forgotten history. But I found the original 1,987 subdivision plat on microfilm. Clear, legible, and absolutely unambiguous about where my property line fell. I had certified copies made. Then I went further back. Found the 1,923 deed that described the original parcel before subdivision, referencing iron pins and old oak trees, 2 of which were still standing on my land. I cross-referenced that with USGS topographic surveys from the 1940s. Every single source agreed. While I was building my paper trail, Ballard's pool deck was going up fast. Concrete poured pavers, laid a beautiful stone-capped retaining wall. $60,000 of construction, easy. All of it sitting on my dirt. I bought a drone. Taught myself to fly it in an afternoon. I'm old, not stupid. Started documenting everything from the air. Timestamp footage showing the original fence post holes still visible in the grass, the new fence line, the construction progress. I flew that drone every 3 days for 2 months. Built a visual record that would make a forensic analyst weep with joy. Then I did something that changed everything. I pulled Ballard's building permits. His pool deck permit referenced a site plan. That site plan showed the property boundary exactly where his new fence was, 8 feet onto my land. The site plan had been approved by the county zoning office, signed off by a man named Dale Hutchins, who happened to be the current zoning administrator and who also happened to have been Ballard's business partner on a strip mall development in 2018. I sat at my kitchen table that night with all of it spread out in front of me. The certified plats, the century-old deeds, the drone footage, the permit records, the business connection between Ballard and Hutchins. And I felt something I hadn't felt since Carol died. Purpose. I hired an attorney. Not a local one, I went to Knoxville. Found a woman named Patricia Reeves who specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for being absolutely merciless in court. I showed her everything. She looked at it for about 20 minutes, then looked up at me and said, "Mr. Hardin, this man is going to wish he'd never heard your name." We filed suit in Chancery Court. Trespass, encroachment, and fraudulent alteration of public records. But Patricia added something I hadn't even considered. She invoked Tennessee Code Annotated 282101, a provision in the adverse possession statute that most people read as protecting long-term possessors. She flipped it. Used it to establish that because I had maintained continuous documented use of that strip of land for over 2 years before the fence was moved, mowing it, walking it, keeping it clear, Ballard couldn't claim any possessory right, even if the records had supported him, which they didn't. Ballard hired a big firm out of Johnson City. They came in confident. Filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the boundary dispute was a simple surveying disagreement. The judge denied the motion in 11 minutes. Discovery was where it got ugly. Patricia subpoenaed Ballard's entire permit history going back 10 years. Every project, every approval, every interaction with the zoning board. What came out was a pattern so brazen it made the judge visibly angry. Ballard had received expedited approvals on 7 different projects, all signed off by Hutchins. 2 of those projects had boundary descriptions that didn't match county records. One had a setback variance granted without the required public hearing. The missing plat from the Register of Deeds digital access logs showed that someone using a county employee login had accessed that file's record 4 days before it disappeared. The login belonged to a clerk in Hutchins' office. In open court, under oath, Hutchins tried to claim he didn't recall approving Ballard's site plan. Patricia put the signed document in front of him. Then she put his business partnership records next to it. Then she played my drone footage showing the original fence post holes measured and annotated, proving the line had been moved. Hutchins looked at Ballard across the courtroom. Ballard wouldn't look back. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. Full restoration of the property line. And because Ballard had knowingly built a permanent structure on land he knew wasn't his using permits, he knew were fraudulently obtained, the court ordered complete demolition of the pool deck at his expense. Every paver, every footing, every inch of that $60,000 monument to arrogance torn out and hauled away. He also referred the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into the missing public records. Last I heard, Hutchins resigned quietly. Ballard's development company lost 2 pending project approvals while the investigation played out. I watched them demolish the deck on a Tuesday morning in October. Stood on my porch with a cup of coffee. Didn't gloat. Didn't wave. Just watched. Ballard put his house on the market 3 weeks later. People asked me if it was worth it. The months of work, the legal fees, the stress. And I tell them the same thing every time. A man who won't defend his boundaries doesn't have any. Carol knew that about me. It's why she married me. And it's why every evening I still walk my property line. Every single inch of it.
Story 7.
I'm the wife, the one he wrote about. I know what you all think of me. Monster, destroyer, the villain of his story. And maybe I am. I did a terrible, unforgivable thing. But a story is never just one person's version, is it? I'm not writing this for your sympathy because I don't deserve it. I'm writing this because I need to understand how I got here, sitting in an empty apartment with nothing but the echo of the life I burned to the ground. My husband is a good man. Let's just get that out of the way. He's brilliant, kind, and a phenomenal father to our 2 girls. He's the kind of man other women look at and think, she's so lucky. And I was. For nearly 20 years, our life was perfect. We had the beautiful house, the 2 well-adjusted kids, the comfortable finances. From the outside, we were the goal. But that perfection was built on a crack, a fault line that ran right through the foundation of our marriage. When we were in our 20s, he got into medical school. It was his dream, the thing he'd worked for his entire life. At the same time, I found out I was pregnant with our first daughter. He didn't hesitate. He gave up his spot, told me a baby with me was more important than any degree, and went to nursing school instead. He became a nurse practitioner, a damn good one, specializing in cardiology. He saved lives. He never, not once, threw it in my face. He never said, I did this for you. He didn't have to. I felt it every single day. Our entire life became a shrine to his sacrifice. The perfect house was proof it was worth it. Our daughter's successes were proof. My comfortable life as a stay-at-home mom turned project manager was proof. Everything had to be perfect to justify the dream he'd given up. The weight of that unspoken debt was crushing. I started to disappear under it. I used to be a firecracker. That's what he called me when we met. I was loud, funny, a little bit reckless. But the wife of the man who gave up everything had to be stable, responsible, quiet. The passion just evaporated. We had sex, sure. We were one of those couples who still did it a few times a week. But it felt like maintenance, like checking the oil in a car. It was another task on the list to keep the perfect machine running smoothly. Our deep conversations on the couch at night, the ones he probably remembers as moments of connection, felt like intellectual exercises to me. We'd talk about philosophy or politics, but we never talked about times, us, asterisk. About the growing distance between us. I was just the wife of a man who settled, and I was settling right alongside him. Then came the attention. It started so small I barely noticed it. I'd gone back to work a few years ago at a large marketing firm. He was younger, a guy on my team. He laughed at my stupid jokes. He'd send me a funny meme during a boring meeting. He told me I was brilliant, that my ideas were the best in the room. It was a drop of water in a desert. It wasn't love. It was never about replacing my husband. It was about feeling seen. It was a reminder of the person I used to be, the firecracker. The first time we went for drinks after work, I told myself it was innocent team bonding. The first time he kissed me in the parking garage, I told myself it was a mistake that would never happen again. But it did. For 18 months, I lived two completely separate lives. In one, I was a loving mother and the wife of a wonderful man I still in my own broken way loved. I cooked dinner, helped with homework, and planned family vacations. In the other life, I was reckless. I was desired. I was having breathless secret encounters in hotels and sending pictures that made my hands shake. It was an addiction. Not to him, the other man, but to the feeling. The thrill. The secret was a little world I built just for me, a place I could go where I wasn't weighed down by sacrifice and quiet perfection. I convinced myself I was in control. I told myself it didn't touch my real life, that it was a fantasy, a game. The secret messages were part of the game. The special toy I bought, a little remote-controlled thing, was a prop. He and I were supposed to go on a business trip together, and I packed it in my suitcase. It felt like playing a character, a woman in a movie who does dangerous, exciting things. I packed it right next to the picture of my husband and my girls that I always take with me. The sick thing is, at that moment, it didn't even feel like a contradiction. My husband and I still had our routine. He was obsessed with technology, with making our perfect home a smart home. Everything was connected to an app on his phone, the lights, the thermostat, even the fancy Dyson fan in our bedroom. He loved being able to control everything with a tap of his finger. Last week we were just sitting on the couch watching some boring show on Netflix. It was a completely normal Tuesday night. The air was a little stuffy, so he picked up my phone from the coffee table where I'd left it screen up. "I'll just turn the fan on," he said, his thumb hovering over the screen to open the app. It was such a normal domestic moment. The kind of moment we'd had 1,000 times before. But as he looked down at the screen, a notification slid down from the top. A text message banner. My heart didn't just drop, it stopped completely. I saw the name and I saw the first few words of the text. It was from him. The other him. My husband's hand froze over the screen. He didn't look at me. He didn't say a word. He just stared at my phone. The sound from the TV, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, everything in the world faded away. There was only the sight of his face slowly going blank, the color draining from it as he read the words on the screen over and over again. He wasn't my husband anymore. He was a statue. And in that awful silent moment, I knew the fire I'd been playing with had finally caught, and my entire world was about to burn. The silence in that living room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a minute. He slowly, deliberately put my phone back down on the table, screen up the hateful little message still glowing. Then he stood up, walked out of the room, and went upstairs to our home office. He didn't slam the door. He closed it with a soft, final click. I sat there frozen on the couch, my blood turning to ice. I didn't know what to do. Should I follow him, apologize, run? I did nothing. I just sat there and waited for the world to end. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with the quiet hum of a printer. For the next 3 days, he barely spoke to me. He slept in the guest room. He was polite, a cold, chilling politeness that was worse than screaming. He'd say good morning and could you pass the salt like he was talking to a stranger. All the while I could hear the printer in the office running off and on for hours at a time. I knew what he was doing. He was building his case. He wasn't a heartbroken husband. He was a prosecutor preparing for trial. The confrontation came on Friday. The girls were at a sleepover. he called me into the living room. On the coffee table where my phone had betrayed me sat a stack of paper. It was enormous. Thick white and bound with a clip. He tapped the top page. 607 pages, he said, his voice completely flat. Every message, every picture, in full color. My legs gave out and I sank onto the floor. He didn't offer a hand. He just watched. He started flipping through the pages, laying them out like evidence. My words. My naked body. My stupid, reckless fantasies all printed out in high resolution on glossy paper. He picked up another item from beside the stack. It was the special toy from my suitcase, the one I'd packed for the business trip. He must have gone through my things. "I believe this was for your trip with him," he asked, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. A little fun on the company's dime. I started to sob ugly, gut-wrenching sobs. "Please," I choked out. "Let's just talk. I'm so sorry. Please let me explain." "Explain," he laughed, but it was a dead sound. "There's nothing to explain. It's all right here," he gestured to the pile of my shame. That's when I realized he didn't want an explanation. He didn't want my remorse. He wanted to watch me break. This wasn't about saving our marriage. This was about destroying me. The demolition was swift and brutal. The next morning I woke up to an email. It was a copy of one he had sent to the wife of my affair partner. He attached a 10-page summary of the evidence, complete with the most graphic photos and messages. My stomach heaved. I had not only destroyed my own family, but I had handed my husband the tools to destroy another one, and he used them without a second thought. Then came the call from my boss. He asked me to come in for a meeting with HR. When I got there, my affair partner was already in the waiting room, his face pale and sick. We were called in together. An anonymous complaint had been filed with a corporate compliance line about an inappropriate relationship, misuse of company time, and conduct unbecoming of management. The complaint, of course, came with a detailed dossier of evidence. My husband had sent it all. We were both fired on the spot. I walked out of that building carrying a cardboard box with my personal items, my career of 15 years gone in an instant. I thought that was the bottom. I was wrong. The nights were the worst. He'd come into my room, I was banished to the guest room, and he wouldn't speak. He'd just look at me with a mixture of rage and disgust. Then he'd force himself on me. It wasn't sex. It was punishment. It was rough and painful and completely silent except for my muffled crying. He wanted me to feel worthless, used, and broken. And the worst part, the part that haunts me when I try to sleep, is that he would prop his phone up on the nightstand and record it. He was collecting trophies of my humiliation. He was archiving my lowest moments. The kind, brilliant man I had married was gone. In his place was a cold, cruel stranger who was systematically burning every part of my life to the ground. When I begged him to stop, to talk to me, to scream at me, anything but this cold, methodical torture, he just stared at me. "I'm a ship without a rudder," he said one night, his voice hollow. "You did this. You broke the compass." He was wrong. He wasn't a ship without a rudder. He was the storm. I made a terrible, selfish, catastrophic mistake. I shattered his heart and betrayed his trust, and I will live with that guilt for the rest of my life. I own that. My actions were indefensible. But his response? That was a choice. He didn't choose to leave. He didn't choose to heal. He chose to break me. He chose to ruin my career, my reputation, and my very soul. He chose to become a monster to punish the monster he saw in me. Now I'm here in this small, quiet apartment that smells like fresh paint. He got the house. He got the kids mostly. I see them on weekends. They look at me differently now. They look at me with his eyes. I know I'm the villain of his story, and maybe I deserve it. But sometimes in the middle of the night when I wake up from a dream of him holding that camera, I wonder what happens when the hero of the story becomes the one who terrifies you the most. We were a perfect picture, and I was the one who ripped it. But he was the one who took the pieces and set them all on fire.
Story 8.
I know what people say about me. I've heard the stories, probably the same ones my daughter's friend posted online. The crazy mother. The narcissistic, abusive monster who ruined everything. It's an easy story to tell, and even easier to believe, especially when my ex-husband Mark spent the better part of a year carefully building that exact image of me for everyone to see. But no one ever wants to hear how a monster is made. They just want to see the claws. For 20 years, my world was Mark and our daughter Amelia. I wasn't just a wife or a mother. I was the architect of our lives. I managed the house, the finances, the school schedules, the social calendar. I built our world brick by brick while Mark went to work and played the part of the fun, easygoing dad. It worked for us. I thought we were happy. Then one day he came home and announced he wasn't anymore. Just like that. 20 years erased over a cup of coffee at the kitchen table I picked out. The divorce wasn't just a separation. It was a demolition. Mark didn't just want to leave. He wanted to win. He wanted to leave me with nothing. He hired a shark of a lawyer who started picking apart our life piece by piece. Every vacation we took, every piece of furniture I bought, every pitiful thing, as his lawyer called it, became a point of contention. He wanted the house I'd made a home. He wanted the savings I'd carefully managed. Most of all, he wanted to make sure our daughter A saw me as the reason our perfect life was falling apart. He was so good at it. He would take her out for dinner and fill her head with poison, all disguised as fatherly concern. "Your mother is just very emotional right now," he'd say. "We have to be patient with her." He'd tell her lies about our money, making it sound like I was hiding it, or spending it recklessly on my own lawyer, when in reality his legal team was draining our accounts with endless, pointless motions. He painted a picture of me as unstable and unreasonable, and A, my sweet girl, started to believe him. Then came the Washington trip. It was a big deal at her school, a week-long trip that cost a ridiculous $2,500. When A first brought home the permission slip, my heart sank. We were bleeding money. But Mark was right there, beaming over her shoulder on FaceTime. "Of course you can go, sweetie. We'll make it happen," he said, a big, generous hero. He knew I was the one who actually had to look at the bank statements. It was a performance, and I was the designated villain who had to deal with the real-world consequences. For A's sake, I played along. I told her we'd figure it out. I even helped her with the school fundraisers. We spent a whole weekend selling overpriced candy bars outside the grocery store. I thought maybe if we do this together, she'll see I'm on her side. For a little while, it felt like old times. But then she'd come home from a weekend with her dad, and the shift was immediate. "Dad said you're probably stressed, but he knows we can afford it," she'd say, parroting his exact words. "He said you just worry too much." It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. He was using this trip, this one special thing, for her to prove his point. To prove that he was the generous, reasonable parent and I was the difficult, stingy one. The trip was no longer about history or friendship or a fun school activity. It was a battlefield, and I was losing her inch by painful inch. She was 3 weeks from the payment deadline and still needed $800. She looked at me with those big, hopeful eyes, and all I could see was his reflection in them. The breaking point wasn't even about A. It was an email from my lawyer. Mark was refusing to compromise on the division of our retirement savings. He wanted 60%. His justification was that I hadn't contributed as much because I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years. 10 years I'd spent raising our child, managing our world so he could build his career. I was looking at a future where I might have to sell my car, a future I didn't recognize and hadn't prepared for. I felt a cold, hard panic rise in my chest. That evening, A came into my room. She was practically vibrating with excitement. My friends and I were planning our roommate groups for the hotel in D, she said, completely oblivious to the fact that our world was on fire around her. That's when I knew I had to do it. I had to make her see reality. I sat her down and told her as calmly as I could that the trip wasn't going to happen. "We can't afford it, honey," I said. "Your father's choices have consequences for all of us." It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was a lesson. It was the truth. The tears started immediately. Huge, gulping sobs. But they didn't look like the tears of a disappointed child. They looked practiced. They were the same tears Mark used whenever he was backed into a corner, the same manipulative waterworks designed to make me feel guilty and cruel. She wasn't just sad about a trip. She was angry she wasn't getting her way. "But Dad said we could," she wailed. "You're just saying no to punish him." Something inside me snapped shut. The part that was soft and patient just broke. "No, Amelia," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm saying no because I am the adult who has to pay the bills your father is creating. I will not be helping you with the rest of the money, and I am officially revoking my permission. You are not going." He could play the hero all he wanted. But I had to be the parent. I had to be the one to say no, even if it made her hate me. The next few weeks were a nightmare of stony silence. A would barely look at me. She spent every moment she could on the phone, whispering to her friends or to her father. I knew I was being painted as the evil witch in her story, but I held my ground. This was about more than a trip. It was about respect. It was about reality. Then one afternoon, she came home from school. I heard the front door open and close, but she didn't go to her room. She walked right into the kitchen where I was standing, and she was smiling. A real, genuine smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in months. It was so jarring it made me freeze. "What is it?" I asked. She couldn't contain it. She was beaming. "You're not going to believe it," she said, her voice full of pure joy. "Someone paid the rest of the money for my trip. The school called me into the office. The last $800, it's all paid. I can go." My blood ran cold. It wasn't relief or happiness I felt. It was the icy certainty of a trap springing shut. I knew with the kind of gut-wrenching instinct only a mother has that Mark was behind this. "Who?" I asked, my voice flat. "Who paid for it?" You don't even know him. It's V's dad. You know V, the girl I sit with in history. Her dad heard I was having trouble and just paid it. Isn't that amazing? Some people are just so nice. The story was so absurd, so perfectly constructed to be unbelievable, that it could only have come from Mark. V was the girl who had been making snide comments to Amelia about our divorce for months. The idea that her father would suddenly become a charitable benefactor was laughable. It was a lie, a flimsy cover story my ex-husband had created to funnel the money in without me being able to prove it. He got to be the secret hero, the anonymous savior, while I was left looking like the monster who had almost kept her from her dream. It was brilliant. It was cruel. Amelia, think about it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That doesn't make any sense. It was your father. He went behind my back and paid it, and he made up this ridiculous story so you wouldn't know. Her face fell. The brilliant smile vanished, replaced by that familiar stubborn scowl. Oh my God, she said, throwing her hands up. Of course, I knew you'd do this. I knew you would find a way to ruin it and make it about Dad. Why can't you just be happy for me, for once? I'm not trying to ruin it, I pleaded. I'm trying to make you see what he's doing. He's manipulating you. He's making me the enemy. No, she said, her voice rising. You're doing that all by yourself. She turned and stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by the life I had built, and felt it all turning to dust. He hadn't just paid the $800. He had bought another piece of my daughter's loyalty, and he'd used my money to do it. A few days later, I came home from a meeting with my lawyer that had left me feeling sick and defeated. As I walked in, I saw an open suitcase on the floor of the hallway. Amelia was pulling clothes out of her closet and folding them. What's going on? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. She didn't look at me. She just kept folding a sweater. I'm going to live with Dad, she said, her voice clipped and distant. He's coming to get me in an hour. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. This was it. The final move in his game. He'd won. You can't do that, I said, the words coming out as a choked whisper. This is your home. We haven't even settled anything with the lawyers. She finally looked up and her eyes were hard. I don't care. I can't live here anymore. It's too stressful. Stressful, I laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. You think this is stressful for you. Try having the man you built a life with systematically tear it down and turn your own child against you. He planned this, Amelia. The trip, the money, all of it. It was all a setup to get you to do this. He's the only one who listens to me, she shouted, her voice cracking. He's the only one who cares about what I want. You just want to control everything. I want to protect you, I screamed back, the months of frustration and fear finally boiling over. From him, he is poisoning you against me, and you're just letting him. Then she said the words. The words I knew weren't hers, the ones that had been polished and fed to her like a script. Dad said you'd be like this. He said you have a narcissistic rage when you don't get your way. He said you'd try to make me feel guilty. His words. His diagnosis. Coming from my daughter's mouth. In that moment, I didn't see Amelia. I saw him. I saw his smug, condescending face. I saw his lawyers. I saw the last 20 years of my life being repackaged as a lie. All the stress, the betrayal, the constant dizzying, gaslighting, it all exploded inside me. It wasn't a thought. It was just a reaction. A raw, animalistic impulse. I raised my hand and I struck her across the face. The sound of it was sharp and ugly in the quiet house. We both froze, stunned. The red mark bloomed on her cheek instantly. Her eyes wide with shock and fear filled with tears. This time they weren't manipulative. They were real. And they were because of me. A wave of absolute horror washed over me. I had become the monster he told her I was. Ames, I started, my hand trembling as I reached for her. She flinched back like I was a wild animal. "Don't touch me," she sobbed, and ran to her room, slamming and locking the door. I heard her on the phone, her voice frantic and broken, telling him to come. Now. I just stood there, paralyzed by shame. The fight was over. He had engineered this moment for months, pushing and pushing until I finally broke, and now he had his proof. I had done the one thing I could never take back. When Mark arrived, he didn't even look at me. He walked straight to her room, spoke to her in a low, comforting voice, and then emerged with her and her suitcase. She kept her face turned away from me, her eyes fixed on the floor. He paused at the front door and finally looked at me, not with anger, but with a look of cold, clinical pity. It was worse than any rage he could have shown. It was the look of a man who had just been proven right. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," he said simply, and then they were gone. The door clicked shut, leaving me in a house that was suddenly overwhelmingly silent. They went to Washington. I saw the pictures online a week later, posted by her friends. Amelia, smiling in front of the Lincoln Memorial, her arm around her dad. They looked so happy. A perfect father-daughter duo starting their new life. He got everything he wanted. The daughter, the moral high ground, the victory. I was left with an empty house filled with memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. I was left with the bills, the legal fees, and the label he had so carefully crafted for me. The crazy, unstable ex-wife. The narcissistic, abusive mother who deserved to be left all alone. And the worst part is in that one horrible, unforgivable moment, I handed him the proof myself.
Story 9.
My brother has always been my hero. I know that sounds like something you'd read in a cheesy book, but for me it's true. When his dad, the man I spent the first 12 years of my life calling my father, found out I wasn't his kid, everything changed. I still remember the look on his face. He looked at me like I was something disgusting he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. And then just like that, I was gone from his life. My mom fell apart, but my brother Michael, who was just a teenager, he stepped up. He was the one who would sneak out to see me, who made sure I knew I wasn't garbage. He was my entire family, the only person who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. We were a team, Michael and me against the world. He was my protector, my best friend. So when he met Sarah, I really did try to be happy for him. I swear I did. But I saw the shift almost immediately. Suddenly all his stories started with we. We went here, we think this. Our weekly phone calls turned into calls every couple of weeks and then mostly just texts. It felt like I was being slowly phased out. Sarah was always nice to my face, of course. She was the master of polite smiles that never reached her eyes. It felt like she was building a wall around him, brick by brick, and every brick was just another excuse for why he was too busy for me. He was my only family, and she was taking him away. When they bought the big house with the indoor pool, it felt like maybe I was wrong. It felt like an apology, like Michael was saying, "See, you're still a part of my life. Come over whenever you want." My friend Chloe and I were so excited. We planned to spend the whole summer there. It was our little piece of paradise, and for a while it felt like old times. Then she got pregnant, and the world went into lockdown. Suddenly, the open invitation had rules. We had to quarantine for 2 weeks before we could come over because I was a risk to the baby. It was the first time she had ever straight up told me I couldn't see my brother, and she used the pregnancy to do it. The baby wasn't even born yet, and it was already a weapon she was using to push me further away. I felt this cold panic in my chest. If I didn't do something, I was going to lose him completely. After our 2 weeks of isolation, we were finally allowed back. But the vibe in that house was awful. You could feel the tension in the air. Sarah would just sit there watching my every move with one hand constantly resting on her stomach like it was a shield. Michael was always working buried in his laptop, looking stressed and exhausted. He didn't seem happy. He seemed trapped. That's why I brought Chloe. Chloe is fun and bubbly and light. She's everything Sarah wasn't being. I just wanted to bring some energy back into that house to remind Michael what it was like to laugh and not feel like he had to be careful with every word he said. And it worked at first. When Chloe would go talk to him while he was working, he would actually look up and smile. She'd tease him about being so serious, and he'd give a sarcastic answer, and for a minute, I could see the old Michael again. That's all I wanted. Of course, Sarah saw it differently. To her, everything was a threat. She'd give Chloe the dirtiest looks. Chloe would walk around in her bikini because, hello, we were there to use the pool. What else was she supposed to wear? But she almost never got in the water. She'd say it was because she wanted to try and pull Michael out of his work fog to get him to talk to someone who wasn't nagging him about baby stuff. Chloe is a very touchy-feely person. She always has been. She'd touch his arm when she was laughing or put a hand on his chest to make a point. It's just how she is. I saw Michael sort of lean away sometimes, but I didn't think he was uncomfortable. I thought he was just being careful. He knew his wife was watching them like a hawk, ready to find something to be mad about. He was trying to keep the peace. I'm not going to lie, I made a few comments myself. I once told Sarah she was getting a little chubby. It was a joke, a sister-in-law jab, you know. She looked at me like I'd just slapped her. Another time I told her a story about my friend whose boyfriend cheated on her after she got super controlling. I was trying to give her a hint like, don't push him away by being so insecure, but she twisted my words. She told Michael I was trying to scare her. Every single thing I did was misinterpreted as an attack. I was just trying to run a little test. I wanted to show my brother that this perfect little life he was building was actually really fragile. I wanted him to see that his wife's insecurity was the real problem, not me and not Chloe. For 2 weeks, we went over every day. The tension got thicker and thicker. Sarah stopped talking to me completely. She would just give me these cold, silent glares from across the room. Chloe kept trying to be friendly, but even she was getting tired of the drama. Yesterday was the worst. We were about to leave, and Chloe went to say goodbye to Michael. She gave him a quick hug, and he hugged her back for a second before letting go. It was nothing. But when I looked over at Sarah, her face was white with rage. She didn't say a word, just stood up and walked out of the room. As Chloe and I were walking to my car, I glanced back through the big glass windows. I could see Michael and Sarah in the kitchen. He was running his hands through his hair, looking stressed, and she was talking with her hands looking furious. She was crying. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I knew it was about us. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach, but also a tiny spark of something else. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally seeing it. He was finally seeing how crazy and controlling she was being. I got in the car and all I could think was, now he has to make a choice. The drive home was quiet. Chloe kept looking over at me, probably waiting for me to say something, but my mind was racing. I replayed the scene at the window over and over again, Sarah with her fake tears and dramatic gestures. Michael looking torn. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. He had to see it. He had to see how manipulative she was being, turning a simple goodbye hug into a full-blown drama. This was it. This was the moment he would realize he was in a cage. "She's a psycho," Chloe finally said, breaking the silence. "Seriously. I was just being nice." "I know," I said, my voice tight. "But maybe this is good. Maybe he finally sees it." Chloe didn't look convinced. "I don't know, girl." He looked pretty stressed. And guys always side with the pregnant wife. "Not Michael," I said, trying to convince myself more than her. "He's different. He knows me. He knows I would never do anything to actually hurt him." When I dropped Chloe off, she gave me a look. "Just be careful, okay? Don't push too hard." I spent the rest of the night staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. I imagined what I would say. I'd be calm and reasonable. I'd tell him I was worried about him, that Sarah's jealousy wasn't healthy for him or the baby. I wouldn't even mention Chloe. I would make it all about my concern for him, my brother. My phone finally buzzed late the next morning. It was him. My heart jumped. I took a deep breath and answered, trying to sound casual. "Hey, you." His voice was ice. "Chloe can't come over anymore." It wasn't a request. It wasn't a discussion. It was a command. All the air went out of my lungs. It wasn't his voice. It was hers. She was speaking through him. The calm, reasonable plan I had rehearsed in my head evaporated. She had won. After everything, after all those years of him promising to be there for me, he was choosing her. He was throwing me away just like his dad threw me away. What I stammered. "Why? She didn't do anything wrong." "It's making Sarah uncomfortable," he said, his voice flat and detached. "It's done. Just don't bring her back to the house." That's when I snapped. All the fear and pain and rage that I'd been swallowing for months just came pouring out. Uncomfortable times. She's times uncomfortable. Of course she is. She's the most insecure, controlling person I have ever met, and you're just letting her do this. "Stop it," he warned. "Don't talk about my wife like that." "Your wife," I laughed, but it was a broken, ugly sound. "She's turned you into her little puppet. You can't even see it. She's using that pregnancy to control every part of your life. She's turned into a miserable beach whale, and she wants everyone else to be as miserable as she is." "You're done," he said, his voice dangerously low. "We're done talking." No, you're going to listen to me. I was screaming now, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't stop the words. They were horrible, but they felt like the only weapons I had left. She baby-trapped you. You were happy before her, and you know it. This wasn't your plan. You never wanted this suffocating life. She got pregnant on purpose to lock you down for good. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I should have stopped. I knew I should have stopped. But the terror of him hanging up, of him leaving me completely, was so overwhelming that I just kept going, throwing out the most hurtful thing I could think of. That baby is already ruining everything, I sobbed. It's the reason you're miserable. It's the reason you're letting her push me away. You should have dragged her to the abortion clinic when you had the chance. The silence that followed was worse than his yelling. It was absolute, empty. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. Don't ever call me again. You are not welcome in my house. You are not a part of my family anymore. He hung up. I just stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. My whole body was shaking. The acidic words I'd spat were still burning in my throat. I didn't mean them. Not really. They came from a place of pure animal panic. I was watching my whole world, my only family, get locked behind a door, and I was just clawing at it, screaming anything to make him turn around. I immediately called back. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I started texting. Asterisk, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I was just upset. Asterisk, asterisk, Michael, please. Don't do this. Asterisk, asterisk, I'm scared. Please don't leave me alone. Asterisk, asterisk, she's turning you against me. Can't you see, asterisk, asterisk, I love you, you're my brother. My hero? No response. The messages were delivered, but he never read them. The 2 blue check marks never appeared. He had blocked me. The next few days were a blur. I barely ate. I couldn't sleep. I felt like that 12-year-old girl all over again, sitting on the curb with a suitcase, watching my life drive away without me. My hero, the one person who swore he would always protect me, had just done the one thing he promised he never would. He abandoned me. And for what? For her. For the woman who had methodically and expertly cut me out of his life. And for the baby that was the final nail in my coffin. She had won. She had taken my brother, my family, my entire sense of safety in the world, and she had destroyed it. I wasn't just losing my brother. I was losing my past and my future all at once. I am completely and utterly alone now. And I don't know how to come back from that. I'm right back where I started, the unwanted kid on the outside looking in at a happy family that isn't mine.
Story teen.
Look, I get it. I'm the monster of the story. The guy with no heart who fired a kid while his dad was on his deathbed. I've heard it all. But you've only heard his side. You heard the story from the guy who thinks rules are for other people. You haven't heard it from the one person who was actually trying to keep the whole damn ship from sinking. My name isn't Sergeant A-hole, but that's what they called me behind my back. I earned the sergeant part in the Army, and it's the only part I care about. In the service, you learn a very simple truth procedure is what separates a functioning unit from a pile of bodies. You follow the chain of command. You file the right paperwork. You do things by the book every single time. Not because you like it, but because the one time you cut a corner is the one time everything goes to hell and people get hurt. When I left the military and went corporate, I was shocked. No one seemed to understand this. They thought rules were suggestions. They thought company policy was a joke. Our company, a short-term lender, operated in a legal gray area the size of Texas. We needed to be perfect. Every I dotted, every ant crossed. One mistake, one sloppy report, and we could get sued into oblivion. I was head of compliance and operations. My job wasn't to be popular, it was to protect the company and everyone's paycheck. Then they hired him. My boss. The guy everyone called Awesome Boss. I was up for that job. I had the experience, the discipline. But the execs chose him. He was a people pleaser. All handshakes and big smiles. He'd approve things with a nod in the hallway and forget about them 5 minutes later. He managed by vibes, not by policy. He was a walking, talking liability, and from day one I started a file on him. Not because I was after his job, but because when his sloppy management finally blew up, I needed a record to show I tried to stop it. Then Awesome Boss hired the OP. The kid. Right out of some fancy school with a degree that he thought made him the smartest guy in the room. He was sharp, I'll give him that. But he had that classic rookie arrogance. He thought the rules didn't apply to him. He'd roll in 10 minutes late, leave 15 minutes early. Small things, yeah, but they show a mindset. They show a guy who thinks he's special. Soon enough, he started making waves. He worked in partner relations, a job that was basically about keeping our referral partners happy. Instead, he started digging into our loan agreements. He'd come to me with concerns. He called our practices predatory. I sat him down and tried to explain how the world works. Look, kid, I told him, our legal team, which costs more per hour than you make in a month, has approved every single one of these products. Our business is high risk, high reward. That's the model. Your job is to do your job, not to relitigate the company's entire legal strategy. He just looked at me with this self-righteous smirk. He and Awesome Boss were a perfect match, two guys who thought their feelings were more important than the multi-million-dollar machine that paid their salaries. He was creating a paper trail of dissent, and I documented every single conversation. The day it all went wrong, the kid got a call. His dad was dying. It's a terrible thing. I'm not a monster. I felt for him. But a personal tragedy doesn't suspend reality. There is a procedure for emergency family leave. You fill out a form. You get a signature from your manager. You submit it to HR. It takes 5 minutes and it protects everyone. It protects the employee by officially documenting their leave, and it protects the company by showing we followed the law. What did the kid do? He ran to Awesome Boss's office in a panic. And what did Awesome Boss do? He clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Go. Just go. Don't worry about anything here. No paperwork. No email. No call to HR. Nothing." One of our employees just vanished from the building in the middle of the workday. From a compliance standpoint, this was a 5-alarm fire. What if he got in a car crash on the way? Is he on the clock? Off the clock? Who is liable without a paper trail? The company was completely exposed. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a catastrophic failure of management. It was proof that Awesome Boss was unfit for his position. I did my duty. I took my file months of documented procedural violations, culminating in this latest disaster, and I went straight to the COO. I laid it all out. This wasn't me being petty. This was me, the guy in charge of safety and compliance, reporting a critical vulnerability that threatened the entire company. The COO saw it immediately. He wasn't happy, but he knew I was right. Awesome Boss was fired the next day. They asked me to step in as interim head to restore order. My first official act was to deal with the source of the problem. A week later, the kid walked back into the office. He looked tired and sad, but he walked in like he was expecting a welcome home party. I asked him to come to my office. I had an HR rep there as required by policy. I kept it simple and clean. You were absent from work for 5 consecutive days without approved leave, I said. This is a direct violation of company policy and constitutes job abandonment. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. He just stared at me, his mouth open. He started talking about his dad, about his conversation with Awesome Boss. I stopped him. Your personal situation is unfortunate, I told him, but it does not change the facts. A verbal conversation that was never documented has no standing. You abandoned your post. The HR rep started to talk about a severance package, but I cut her off. No severance, I said. This is a termination for cause. Paying him would be admitting the company did something wrong. We did nothing wrong. He broke the rules. He is owed nothing. It was by the book. It was fair. I had neutralized a liability and fixed a broken process. For a few months, it actually worked. The department ran like a well-oiled machine. Morale was low, sure. People called me a robot. They hated the new paperwork. But we were compliant. We were safe. I thought I had cut out the cancer and saved the patient. I thought the problem was solved. I was wrong. The problem wasn't a couple of rogue employees. The problem was so much bigger. I was sitting at my desk one Tuesday afternoon, reviewing quarterly compliance reports, when an email landed in my inbox. It was from a sender I didn't recognize, a .gov address. The subject line was chilling. Official Inquiry, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering a steady, disciplined rhythm against my ribs. A soldier doesn't panic. A soldier assesses the threat. The CFPB, this was the big leagues. This was the regulatory nuke everyone in our industry has nightmares about. My first thought wasn't fear. It was a cold, sharp sense of validation. Asterisk. This times is why I was so hard on everyone. Asterisk. This times is why paperwork mattered. I stood up, walked to my filing cabinet, and pulled out my folders. Everything was there, my reports on Awesome Boss's procedural screw-ups, my documented conversations with the OP about his concerns, the pristine HR file on his for-cause termination. We were ready. My department was a fortress. I went straight to the COO's office files in hand. We have an inbound threat, I said, placing the folder on his desk. But my house is in order. We can fight this. He didn't even look at my files. He just looked tired. Cooperate fully, Sergeant, he said, using the name he knew I preferred. but run everything through legal. Everything. It was the first red flag. He wasn't acting like a commander preparing for battle. He was acting like a man looking for cover. A week later, they arrived. 2 auditors from the Bureau, a man and a woman, both looking like they'd been born wearing gray suits. They weren't interested in my perfect time-tracking sheets or the new multi-step approval process I'd implemented for emergency leave. They pulled out a binder of their own, thick with printed emails and memos. "We have a whistleblower statement," the woman said, her voice flat. "From a former employee. It alleges the company knowingly engaged in predatory lending practices and that management actively suppressed internal complaints." It all clicked into place. The kid. An awesome boss. They hadn't just gotten mad. They had gone to war. They had taken their half-baked ignorant theories about our business and gift-wrapped them for the federal government. "Can you confirm you were this employee's direct manager at the time of his termination?" she asked. "For a short period, yes," I said, my voice steady. "I took over after his previous manager was terminated for gross negligence. I thought this would score a point. It didn't." The man slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of one of my own reports to the COO. My handwriting was in the margins. He pointed to a line where I'd summarized the OP's complaints. "So you were aware of his concerns?" "Of course," I said. He was a junior employee in a non-legal role who thought he knew better than our entire legal department. I documented his unsubstantiated claims and filed them per procedure. It was my job to note his dissent and keep an eye on him as potential internal risk. They just looked at each other. In that moment, I realized we were speaking different languages. I was showing them how I'd identified and contained a threat to the company. They were looking at a manager who had been told about a potential crime and had done nothing but file a memo. My attempts to protect the company were being twisted into a cover-up. The OP hadn't just given them documents. He'd given them a story. And in his story, I was the villain who silenced the hero. The investigation was a nightmare. They interviewed everyone. The narrative that emerged was exactly what the kid and his old boss wanted. Awesome Boss was the cool manager who listened. The OP was the brave young kid who spoke truth to power. And I was the company man, the hatchet man who got rid of them both to protect the company's dirty secrets. My meticulous records, my files, my proof, it all just became evidence against me. The fines came down a month later. They were astronomical. The number had so many zeros I couldn't even process it. We were ordered to stop offering half our products. The company was crippled overnight. The panic in the executive suite was like a physical thing you could taste in the air. I was called into the CEO's office. The COO was there too. They didn't offer me a seat. "We have to make some changes," the CEO started. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "The board is demanding accountability." The COO cleared his throat. The final report from the Bureau cites a failure to properly escalate employee complaints at the management level. They're pointing a finger directly at your department. My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? I escalated times everything times to you." I looked directly at the COO. My reports on the OP, his concerns, my warnings that he and Awesome Boss were liabilities. You got all of it. I have copies. You read them. You promoted me because of them. The CEO stepped forward, his face a mask of disappointment. Your reports focused on minor infractions, Sergeant. Tardiness, unapproved leave. You buried the lead. You had an employee raising serious legal flags, and your response was to discipline him for job abandonment. It looks like you were trying to shut him up. I felt the floor drop out from under me. It was a lie. A clean, simple, devastating lie. They were taking my own discipline, my own adherence to the rules, and using it as the murder weapon. They were the ones who had approved the loans. They were the ones who had been copied on every legal review. But I was the one who had documented the problem employee. I had handed them the perfect scapegoat on a silver platter, me. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. We're terminating your employment, the COO said, refusing to meet my eyes. The official reason will be failure to report critical employee complaints to the executive team. I was fired for not reporting the very things I had spent a year reporting. I was being punished for being the only one who actually did his job by the book. I just nodded. There was nothing else to do. I didn't fight. A soldier knows when the battle is lost. I packed up my desk that afternoon. The people who had called me a robot wouldn't even look at me. To them, it all made sense. The monster got what he deserved. I learned the biggest lesson of my life in that office. I thought the system was the company handbook, the chain of command, the procedures. I was wrong. That's just the fake system they create to keep people like me in line. The real system has only one rule: protect the men at the top. I was loyal to the rules, to the process, to what I thought was the company. And when the time came, the men at the top, to save their own skins, flushed me down the toilet with the rest of the evidence. I was the proof of their guilt, so I had to disappear. The OP probably thinks he's a hero. And maybe in the end he was. He and Awesome Boss burned the whole thing down. But I was the one who was loyal. I was the one who tried to keep the ship afloat. And for my loyalty, I got a pink slip. They needed a turd to sink to the bottom and take the blame with it. I was it. I was the turd that sank.
Story 11.
I know you've probably heard their side of the story. I'm the crazy neighbor, the Karen, who freaked out over a little noise. That's the simple version, the one that makes them the victims and me the monster. But they don't tell you about the silence. They don't tell you what that car really stole from me. Before all this, my life was measured in minutes of quiet. My son, my beautiful little boy Leo, was born with colic and a hate for sleeping that felt personal. Getting him down for a nap wasn't just a task. It was a mission. It was a delicate hour-long dance of rocking, shushing, and walking endless circles around our living room until his tiny body finally went limp in my arms. When I laid him in his crib, I'd hold my breath, tiptoeing out of the room like a bomb disposal expert. The click of the door latch felt like a gunshot. Those moments when he finally slept, that was my oxygen. An hour, maybe two if I was lucky, to shower, to eat something that wasn't a granola bar, to just sit and not be touched. To feel like a human being again. We bought this house specifically because the street was a dead end. It was quiet. It was my sanctuary. That silence was everything to me. It was the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. Then they showed up. Well, the car did. It was some kind of old muscle car, the kind that looks like it runs on pure anger. And the sound, it wasn't just loud. It was a physical thing. A deep guttural roar that vibrated through our windows and up through the floorboards. The first time it started, I nearly dropped a plate. It coughed and sputtered to life like a dragon waking up, and then it settled into this ground-shaking idle. And it was every single day. Right around 2 in the afternoon. Nap time. The first day, Leo's eyes shot open the second the engine turned over. He went from sound asleep to screaming red-faced panic in a heartbeat. All my work gone. It took another hour to calm him down. The next day, the same thing happened. The roar, the jolt, the screaming. My peace was shattered. My baby was constantly miserable and overtired. And I was starting to feel a different kind of tired. The kind that sits behind your eyes and makes the world feel fuzzy and wrong. A frantic, buzzing kind of exhaustion. After the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I saw the younger one, the one learning to drive, standing by the car. I took a deep breath, put on a friendly neighbor smile, and walked over. My heart was pounding. I hate confrontation. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm Karen from next door. I just wanted to ask." Mind trying to keep it down a bit. I have a newborn and he doesn't really seem to like it that much. I tried to make it a joke, a light little thing between neighbors. He gave me this lazy half smile. "Yeah, sure," he said. But he wasn't really looking at me. His eyes were on the car like he was a teenager with his first crush. He didn't get it. He didn't hear the desperation in my voice. To him, I was just making a polite request. To me, I was begging for my sanity. Nothing changed. Maybe the lessons were 5 minutes shorter, but the noise was the same. The daily explosion that ripped through my house and tore my baby from his sleep. 2 days later, it happened again. The engine roared and Leo started screaming, and something inside me just snapped. I didn't even put on shoes. I marched right out there, my hands shaking. This time I wasn't smiling. "I thought I told you to keep it down," I said. My voice was tight. The guy just shrugged. He had the nerve to look annoyed with me. "It's just how the car is," he said. "It's loud when it starts. It's a waste of gas to turn it off and on while we're practicing." A waste of gas. He said that to my face. He was telling me that a few dollars worth of gasoline was more important than my child sleeping. That his hobby was more important than my well-being. He looked right through me like I was an insect buzzing in his ear. Like I was the one being unreasonable. I just turned around and walked back inside. I didn't say another word. That night was the worst yet. Leo was so overtired he wouldn't settle at all. He just cried and cried. My husband tried to help, but the baby just wanted me. And all I could hear, even in the dead of night, was the phantom echo of that engine. It was burned into my brain. I felt like I was under siege in my own home. Around 3 a.m., I was standing at the window rocking Leo, and I saw it. The car. It was just sitting there in their driveway under the moonlight. It looked so smug, so arrogant. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was a monument to their selfishness. A big ugly symbol of how little they cared about me or my baby. It was the reason I hadn't slept more than 2 consecutive hours in a week. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I put Leo back in his crib, praying he wouldn't wake up. I grabbed my house keys from the bowl by the door, walked outside into the cold night air, and crossed the lawn. My bare feet didn't even feel the wet grass. My world had shrunk down to that shiny, dark metal beast. I pulled out my longest key and dragged it down the driver's side door. The screech it made was ugly, but it felt good. It was a sound I was in control of. I gave the car a long, deep scar for every hour of sleep it had stolen from me, for every scream my baby had let out. Then I knelt down by the front tire. I jammed the tip of the key into the rubber, pushing with all my weight, until I felt a pop. A quiet hiss filled the air. The sound of release. The sound of pressure escaping. Finally, silence. I walked back inside, my bare feet cold on the kitchen tile, and locked the door behind me. I didn't feel guilty. I felt calm. For the first time in days, the frantic buzzing behind my eyes had stopped. I went upstairs and looked into the crib. Leo was still sound asleep, his little chest rising and falling in a perfect, peaceful rhythm. I had protected that. I had won. I knew they would come. I sat in the dark living room just waiting. I figured it would be in the morning when they found the damage. But I guess they heard the hiss of the tire. The pounding on my front door started about 10 minutes later. It wasn't a knock. It was an angry, frantic banging that shook the whole frame. "Hey, get out here!" It was the older one, the brother-in-law. His voice was muffled but full of rage. I didn't move from the couch. My heart was starting to beat a little faster now, but it was a cold, steady rhythm. This was the fight I knew was coming. "We know it was you. What the hell is wrong with you?" I heard the younger one's voice join in, just as angry. They were shouting, swearing. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, but didn't open it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. "I'm not apologizing," I said, my voice clear and loud enough for them to hear. That's when it really started, the insults. "You crazy bitch," one of them yelled. "You're a psycho." The other one called me a stupid bimbo. It was ugly, vile. And in a weird way, it made me feel even more right. This is who they were. This was the kind of person who didn't care about a screaming baby, who thought a waste of gas was a good reason to terrorize a neighbor. They were aggressive, entitled hicks who only understood force. Well, I had given them force. "We're calling the cops," the brother-in-law screamed. "Go ahead," I said, back through the door. Then I walked away and went back upstairs to sit in the rocking chair in Leo's room, just watching him sleep. About 20 minutes later, there was a new knock on the door. This one was more official. Firm, but not unhinged. I looked out the window and saw the flashing blue and red lights painting my lawn. My stomach twisted, but I held my ground. I went to the door again. "Who is it?" "Ma'am, it's the police. We need you to come outside and speak with us." I cracked the door just enough to see an officer standing there, but kept the chain on. "I'm not coming outside," I said. "This is my home. My baby is sleeping upstairs." The officer looked tired. "Ma'am, your neighbors are alleging that you vandalized their vehicle. We just need to get your side of the story." My side of the story is that they have been harassing me and my infant son for a week with a car that sounds like a jet engine. I asked them to stop. They refused. I am the victim here. They've been terrorizing me in my own home. He sighed. "That may be, but right now we're investigating a crime. You destroying their property isn't the way to handle it. Now please come outside so we can sort this out. Sort this out. They wanted me to go out there in the middle of the night in my pajamas and stand on my lawn next to the two men who had just been screaming obscenities at me to leave my sleeping baby alone in the house. No! This was my safe place. I wasn't leaving it. I know my rights, I told him. You can't make me leave my house without a warrant. He just stared at me for a long moment. Ma'am, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I just closed the door and locked it. I heard him talking on his radio. I heard my neighbors yelling in the background, telling him I was crazy. They were painting their picture of me, and the police were buying it. The crazy Karen. The hysterical new mom. No one was listening to my side. No one cared about the days of noise, the sleep deprivation, the feeling of being trapped by a sound you can't escape. All they saw was a keyed car and a popped tire. They eventually left. The flashing lights disappeared and the street went quiet again. But it wasn't a peaceful quiet anymore. It was heavy, threatening. The next few days were a blur. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then it did. An officer came to my door with a piece of paper. A warrant for my arrest for destruction of property. They were actually charging me. They were treating me like a common criminal. I had to call my husband at work, completely humiliated, and explain that he needed to come home because I was about to be arrested. But that wasn't the end of it. A week later, another man came to the door and served me with papers. A lawsuit. They were suing me for the damage to the car, for emotional distress, for everything they could think of. They want $60,000. $60,000. That's more than our down payment on this house. It's my son's college fund. It's everything. They want to ruin us. They get to tell everyone they're the victims. They were just two guys having some fun with a car and their crazy neighbor snapped for no reason. But they don't tell you about the screaming baby. They don't tell you about the mother who was so tired she could barely think straight. They don't tell you how it feels when you beg someone for a little consideration and they look at you like you're nothing. They pushed me and pushed me until I broke. And now they're going to make me pay for it. All because I asked for a little bit of quiet. A little bit of human decency in the one place I was supposed to feel safe. They see a keyed car. I see the scar I had to give them just to make them finally listen.
Story 12.
I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do. My daughter, my own child, has turned her back on our family and is trying to make me out to be some kind of monster. She's poisoned people against me, and I just need someone, anyone, to hear my side of the story. My husband and I have always built our lives on faith and family. We don't have much in the way of money, I'll be the first to admit that. We live a simple life, but we are rich in the ways that truly matter. God has blessed us with 5 beautiful, healthy children, each one of them a gift. My life's work isn't in some office building. It's right here in my home, in the noise and the chaos and the love that fills these walls. Yes, we've had hard times. We've had to ask for help from family, and they've given it because that's what family does. We are a unit. We rise and fall together. When one part of the body is weak, the other parts support it. That's how it's supposed to be. My daughter, my second oldest, was always so bright. We were so proud when she got into college following her older brother. But I started to see a change in her. College these days, it fills young people's heads with such selfish ideas. It's all about your career, your goals, your independence. They teach you to put yourself first above everyone and everything. She started talking about her 5-year plan and her future, as if her future wasn't completely tied to ours. It was my money this, and my life that. It started to scare me. I saw her drifting away from the values we raised her with, the values of family and sacrifice. A few months ago, God gave us the most wonderful surprise. I'm pregnant. At my age, it's a true miracle, a sign that we are still walking the path He laid out for us. I felt this incredible peace and joy. My husband and I knew it would be a challenge, but we also knew it was a blessing we had to accept. We decided to tell the children all together. We gathered them in the living room, and I could barely contain my excitement. I looked at all their faces, these children we had raised, and I was so ready for them to share in this joy with us. I said the words, "We're going to have another baby." 4 of my children were happy, or at least they were trying to be. But my daughter, her face just crumpled into this mask of pure disgust. Before anyone else could even speak, she just exploded. "Are you kidding me?" she yelled. She called us irresponsible. She started screaming about money, about how we could barely afford the kids we already had, how we were always asking relatives for help. She threw everything in our faces, making our struggles sound like crimes. My husband tried to calm her down. He's a good man, a patient man. He tried to explain that we would make it work just like we always have. He said we are a family and we would all pitch in, and then he brought up the college fund. It was money left to her by her great uncle, my uncle. He was a man who loved family more than anything. My husband reminded her that the money was there and that it was for family. He just asked her gently if she would consider using it to help us prepare for the new baby. He wasn't demanding it. He was asking her to be a part of this, to invest in her new brother or sister, to show that she was still a part of this family, this unit. Her answer was, hell no. She said it was her money for her future and we had no right to it. That hurt, but what she said next, that's what broke me. She looked right at me. Her eyes were so cold, and she said, "You should just get an abortion." An abortion. She told me to kill my child, her own sibling. The room went silent. I couldn't breathe. In that moment, the girl I had raised was gone, and in her place was a stranger. A cold, cruel person who would suggest I murder my own baby to protect her bank account. I started crying. I couldn't help it. My husband told her she had crossed a line, a terrible line, but the damage was done. I saw what the world had turned my daughter into. She stormed out of the room, and I just sat there, my hand on my stomach, trying to protect the little life inside me from the hate that had just been thrown at it. I thought that was the worst it could get. I prayed that she would come to her senses, that she would come and apologize. But the fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Later that night, my phone started ringing. Then my husband's phone rang. It was family. And they didn't sound happy. My daughter wasn't just angry. She was starting a war. She had called my cousin, my first cousins, telling them her side of the story, twisting our words, making us sound like greedy monsters. They wanted to talk. They were on their way over. It wasn't to congratulate us. It was an ambush. And my own daughter was the one leading the charge. I barely had time to wipe my tears before the doorbell rang. My husband went to answer it, and I stood there in the living room, my hands still on my stomach, feeling like a cornered animal. My cousin Sarah walked in first. I love Sarah, I truly do, but she chose a different path in life. A career travel, no husband, no children. She could never understand the joy I feel, the purpose. Behind her came my other cousins, Mark and his wife Karen. Mark's an accountant. And behind them all, standing in the doorway like she was afraid to come in, was my daughter. They didn't come in to hug me or ask how I was feeling. They came in with grim faces like they were here to deliver bad news, not receive good news. They sat on the couch opposite me and my husband, and the air was thick and cold. My daughter wouldn't look at me. She just stared at a spot on the carpet. Sarah started. She spoke in that soft, gentle voice she uses when she thinks she's being sensitive, but it just sounds condescending. She said they were concerned. Concerned about us, about the other children, about the new baby's quality of life. Quality of life. My children have a life filled with love and faith. What more quality do they need? She talked about how much we struggle already. How it wasn't fair to bring another child into that. I just looked at her and thought, how can a woman who has never felt a baby kick inside her dare to tell me what's fair for my child? Then Mark pulled out a folder. A folder he started talking about our finances, about inflation, about the future cost of college. He had spreadsheets and numbers trying to prove with math that my baby shouldn't exist. My husband tried to argue to explain that God always provides, that our faith is stronger than any financial hardship. Mark just shook his head and said, "Faith doesn't pay the bills." I felt my blood run hot. To sit in my own home and listen to my family tell me that my child, this miracle inside of me, was a bad investment. An entry on a balance sheet. All this time, my daughter said nothing. She just sat there, letting them be her voice, her attack dogs. I finally looked right at her. "Is this what you wanted?" I asked her. "To have our family come here and lecture us? To tell me my baby is a mistake?" Her eyes finally met mine, and they were full of tears, but not of sadness. They were tears of anger. "Someone had to make you see reason," she whispered. "You won't listen to me." "Reason," I said, and my voice started to shake. "You call telling me to kill my child. Reason." The room went quiet again. My cousins looked uncomfortable. Maybe they hadn't known she'd said that. But the damage was done. The line had been crossed. This wasn't a discussion. It was a judgment. They had all decided we were wrong, that our faith was foolish, and that our baby was a burden. My husband stood up. He told them calmly but firmly that this was our decision, our blessing, and our home. I told Sarah and Mark that if they couldn't be happy for us, they could leave. I had to protect myself and the little life I was carrying from all their negativity. They left, and my daughter went with them without another word. The house felt so empty and cold after they were gone. My other kids were hiding in their rooms. They'd heard the yelling. The joy I had felt was gone, replaced by a deep, aching hurt. My own family had turned on me, led by my own child. A few days later, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find my daughter packing boxes in her room. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just cold, blank. I asked her what she was doing. "I'm moving out," she said, not looking at me. "I'm going to stay with a friend." "You're leaving?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You're abandoning your family, your brothers and sisters." She finally turned to me. "I can't stay here," she said. I can't watch you do this. And I can't listen to you talk about this baby like it's a blessing when all I see is how much everyone is going to suffer. You see suffering because you only see money, I told her. You don't see love. You don't see family. We didn't want your money for us. We wanted you to be a part of this family, to share in our blessing. But you made your choice. Yeah, I did, she said. She picked up a box and pushed past me. She didn't hug me. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out the door, out of our home and out of our lives. I haven't heard from her since. She won't answer my calls or my husband's. She's cut us off completely. So now here I am. I'm pregnant with a beautiful new baby on the way, a gift from God. And I'm mourning the loss of a daughter. She chose her college fund, her future, and a friend's basement over her own flesh and blood. She was poisoned by a world that teaches you that your own happiness is the most important thing. She can't see that true happiness comes from sacrifice, from being part of something bigger than yourself. I spend my nights praying for her. I pray that God softens her heart and opens her eyes to the truth. We didn't ask her for much. We just asked her to be a sister, to be a daughter, to be family. But to her it was too high a price to pay. And I'm left to wonder how a child I poured all my love into could grow up to be so heartless.
Story 13.
Okay, I know people are going to judge me, but you weren't there. You didn't see how it was between us for 2 years. He wasn't just my boss. Anyone who worked in that office could tell you that. He was the sun the rest of us orbited around, and I was the closest planet. He made a boring job fun. He remembered little things like how I took my coffee or that I was stressed about my exams. He saw me. We had this thing, our own private language almost. Inside jokes from meetings, looks across the room that said more than words ever could. And the emails, he'd send me work and at the bottom it would say, "Thanks, my love." My heart would just stop for a second every time. I know, he was a bit old-fashioned and said it to some of the much older women in the office too. But it was different with me. You don't say that to a two-year-old girl, your direct report, unless there's something there. It felt like a secret, a little piece of affection just for me hidden in a work email. Then there was her. His fiancée. The one from the perfect Instagram photos. The ready-made family she brought with her. At work he'd talk about her, but it was like he was reading from a script. She's amazing. The kids are great. It never sounded real. It sounded like something he had to say. A few times she came by the office to meet him for lunch, and it was just awkward. She would stand by his desk, not really talking to anyone, just holding his hand like she was afraid he'd disappear. She didn't get him. She didn't see the funny, charming, brilliant man we all saw every day. She just saw the provider, the guy who was supposed to come home and play house. I felt bad for him. He was trapped, and I think he knew it. His farewell party was everything. It was the last chance for something to happen, for him to show me that what we had was real and not just in my head. He told me he'd begged her to come, and when she did, I could see why. He had to keep up appearances. She showed up in this plain dress, looking completely lost among all of his work friends. I watched them all night. He was playing the part of the perfect fiancé, one hand on her back, laughing at her quiet jokes. It looked like hard work, but every few minutes his eyes would find mine. He'd be in the middle of a conversation with someone else, but he'd look over at me and give a little smile. It was like he was saying, "Help me. This is so boring." I knew what he meant. So I went over to their table. I had to save him. "Hey guys," I said, all bubbly and fun. I sat down and started telling a story about a stupid thing that happened at work last week. He lit up. He was laughing for real now, not the polite little laugh he was giving her. I was leaning in, playing with my hair, just being myself. Being the person I knew he actually liked. He was drinking a lot more than I'd ever seen him drink before. People kept bringing him drinks and he was just downing them. I thought, good. He needs this. He needs to let go of the pressure. I went to the bar. 3 shots of tequila, please. I brought them back to the table. To the best boss ever, I said, handing one to him and one to her. He drank his right away. She just stared at hers for a minute before taking a tiny, disgusted sip. See, she didn't get it. She didn't want him to have fun. A little while later, she stood up and said she was going home. The relief was so obvious. He did his duty, walked her out to her taxi, and gave her a kiss. But when he came back inside, he was a different person. The real him was back. The party kicked into high gear. We were all dancing, shouting, and he was in the middle of it all, laughing and hugging everyone. He was so drunk. His best friend even came over and said, "Mate, cool it with the flirting," but he just laughed it off. We weren't flirting. We were just connecting. The night was winding down and the crowd was thinning out. The energy between us was practically buzzing. I knew it was now or never. He was swaying on his feet, his eyes barely focused. I leaned in close, my mouth next to his ear so he could hear me over the music. "Come on," I whispered, and I tilted my head towards the hallway where the toilets were. It wasn't a question. It was a dare. A final test. And he followed me. He didn't even hesitate. My heart was pounding as I pushed open the door to the disabled toilet and pulled him in after me. We were finally alone, away from everyone. The music was just a dull beat through the door. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for 2 years. I put my hands on his chest, looked up at him, and I kissed him. For a second, his lips met mine. It was clumsy, wet, and tasted like tequila. And then, it was over. He just went limp, his body sagging against the wall. He blinked slowly, like he was trying to figure out where he was. He mumbled something. I couldn't hear it at first, so I leaned in. "What?" I asked. He said her name. His fiancée's name. That one word hit me like a bucket of ice water. All the air went out of my lungs. It was all in my head. The looks, the emails, the "my love," it meant nothing. He was just a nice, charming boss, and I was just another stupid girl who fell for it. The humiliation was so intense it felt like a physical pain burning up my neck and face. I pushed past him and ran out of the bathroom, out of the bar, and into the cold night air. I practically fell through my front door, tears streaming down my face. My boyfriend was on the couch and jumped up when he saw me. "Jess, what's wrong? What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." The questions came one after another. Where was I? Why was I so late? Why was I crying? I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't say I threw myself at my blackout drunk boss and he rejected me for his fiancée. I couldn't bear the thought of him looking at me with pity. The shame was a monster eating me alive. I had to kill it. I had to change the story. A new version of the night started to form in my mind, a version where I wasn't pathetic. I was a victim. A version where he wasn't just a drunk guy who loved his fiancée, but a predator. He followed me, I sobbed, the lie feeling more real with every word. He dragged me into the bathroom. He was so drunk he wouldn't listen. He wouldn't let go of me. He assaulted me. My boyfriend's expression went from worried to pure fury. His face was like thunder. He clenched his fists, his whole body shaking with rage. That bastard, he spat. He pulled out his phone, his thumb flying across the screen. I'm texting her right now. What's his fiancée's number? She needs to know what kind of monster she's about to marry. I didn't stop him. I just watched his thumb hit send, and it was done. A little part of me felt sick, but a bigger part felt powerful. The story was out of my hands now. It wasn't just my pathetic, humiliating secret anymore. It was his crime. My boyfriend wrapped his arms around me. It's okay, he whispered. I've got you. He's not getting away with this. I buried my face in his chest, my sobs finally feeling real. The wait was the worst part. Every notification on my phone made my heart jump into my throat. I imagined her reading the text, her perfect world cracking. I imagined her screaming at him, crying, throwing his things out. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain I felt. My boyfriend was pacing the living room, a soldier waiting for battle. He was angry for me, and it felt good. It felt better than the shame. An hour later, her name flashed on his screen, an incoming call. My boyfriend answered it on speaker, his voice low and dangerous. Yeah? Her voice was surprisingly calm. Too calm. I need to speak with Jessica. You can talk to me, he snarled. No, she said, her voice like steel. I will only speak to Jessica. My boyfriend looked at me and I nodded, my throat dry. He handed me the phone. I took a shaky breath. Hello. Jessica, she said, and there was no sympathy in her voice. Tell me exactly what you are accusing him of. So I did. I told her the story that was now becoming my truth. I told her how he followed me, how he was too strong, how he pushed me against the wall in the toilet. I told her he kissed me, that his hands were all over me. I cried as I said it, making sure she could hear every hitch in my breath. There was a long silence on the other end. I thought maybe she'd hung up. Then she spoke, her voice flat. He doesn't remember any of it. He was carried to his hotel room. He doesn't remember leaving the bar, let alone going into a toilet with you. The rage flared up in me, hot and real. Of course, he doesn't remember. How convenient he gets to assault me and then just forget about it because he was drunk. Is that his excuse for everything? The lie was my shield now, and I held it up against her cold disbelief. I know my fiancé, she said quietly. And I know he wouldn't do that. You don't know him at all, I shrieked, and then I hung up. I threw the phone on the couch and collapsed into my boyfriend's arms. He held me tight, telling me she was just in denial, that she couldn't handle the truth about her perfect man. I let myself believe him. I had to. The next few days were a blur. The news spread through the office like a virus. It turned out he'd never even made it to his new job. The offer was pulled after HR got an anonymous tip. I still don't know who sent it. His career was torched overnight. People at work were split. Some looked at me with pity and support, whispering about how brave I was. Others looked at me with suspicion, their eyes cold. They'd known him for years, and they couldn't believe it. I avoided them. I ate lunch at my desk. I played the part of the fragile victim, the girl just trying to get through the day. My boyfriend became my shadow, my champion. He drove me to work, he picked me up. He made sure I was never alone. Our relationship, which had been feeling a bit shaky before all this, was suddenly rock solid. He saw me as this strong, wronged woman, and he was my protector. He loved me more for it. All I had to do was keep the story straight. His best friend from work, the one who'd told him to cool it at the party, cornered me by the coffee machine one afternoon. "I don't believe you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He loves her." He was blackout drunk. "What did you really want from him, Jessica?" I felt that old familiar shame creeping up my neck, but I pushed it down. "You should be asking him what he wanted from me," I said, my voice trembling for effect. And I walked away before he could reply. Every time someone doubted me, it just made me cling to the lie harder. It was all I had left. Eventually, the gossip died down. He was gone, a ghost in the office we no longer spoke of. I got a promotion a few months later. Life moved on. My boyfriend and I moved in together. We built a life on the foundation of my lie. Sometimes at night, when he was asleep, I would stare at the ceiling, and the real memory would play in my head, the tequila on his breath, the limp way he sagged against the wall, the sound of her name, a name he chose over mine. I'd feel the humiliation all over again, and I'd remind myself why I did it. He embarrassed me. He led me on for 2 years with his little smiles and his my loves, and then he threw me away for her. He deserved what he got. Years passed. I don't work at that company anymore. My boyfriend and I are engaged now. The other night I was scrolling through social media, a mindless habit, and I saw a photo posted by an old colleague. It was from a wedding. And there he was, smiling, looking happy and healthy. Next to him in a white dress was her. They were married. They'd survived it. They had stayed together through the fire I had set. For a second, the world tilted. The truth, the real one, screamed in my head. Asterisk. I did this. I lie. I tried to ruin him because he didn't want me. Asterisk, the weight of it was crushing a physical pressure on my chest. But then just as quickly I shoved it back down into the dark where it belonged. He must have manipulated her. He must have gaslit her into believing him. He got away with it. He got his happy ending while I was the one left with the scars. I closed the app and turned to my fiancé, sleeping beside me. He would never know the truth. No one would. In my story, I'm still the victim. And after all this time, I've learned that if you tell a story long enough, you start to believe it yourself. He made me do it. It was his fault. It had to be.
Story 14.
I know what people say about me. I've heard the stories, probably the same ones my daughter's friend posted online. The crazy mother. The narcissistic, abusive monster who ruined everything. It's an easy story to tell, and even easier to believe, especially when my ex-husband Mark spent the better part of a year carefully building that exact image of me for everyone to see. But no one ever wants to hear how a monster is made. They just want to see the claws. For 20 years, my world was Mark and our daughter Amelia. I wasn't just a wife or a mother. I was the architect of our lives. I managed the house, the finances, the school schedules, the social calendar. I built our world brick by brick while Mark went to work and played the part of the fun, easygoing dad. It worked for us. I thought we were happy. Then one day he came home and announced he wasn't anymore. Just like that. 20 years erased over a cup of coffee at the kitchen table I picked out. The divorce wasn't just a separation. It was a demolition. Mark didn't just want to leave. He wanted to win. He wanted to leave me with nothing. He hired a shark of a lawyer who started picking apart our life piece by piece. Every vacation we took, every piece of furniture I bought, every pitiful thing, as his lawyer called it, became a point of contention. He wanted the house I'd made a home. He wanted the savings I'd carefully managed. Most of all, he wanted to make sure our daughter A saw me as the reason our perfect life was falling apart. He was so good at it. He would take her out for dinner and fill her head with poison, all disguised as fatherly concern. "Your mother is just very emotional right now," he'd say. "We have to be patient with her." He'd tell her lies about our money, making it sound like I was hiding it, or spending it recklessly on my own lawyer, when in reality his legal team was draining our accounts with endless, pointless motions. He painted a picture of me as unstable and unreasonable, and A, my sweet girl, started to believe him. Then came the Washington trip. It was a big deal at her school, a week-long trip that cost a ridiculous $2,500. When A first brought home the permission slip, my heart sank. We were bleeding money. But Mark was right there, beaming over her shoulder on FaceTime. "Of course you can go, sweetie. We'll make it happen," he said, a big, generous hero. He knew I was the one who actually had to look at the bank statements. It was a performance, and I was the designated villain who had to deal with the real-world consequences. For A's sake, I played along. I told her we'd figure it out. I even helped her with the school fundraisers. We spent a whole weekend selling overpriced candy bars outside the grocery store. I thought maybe if we do this together, she'll see I'm on her side. For a little while, it felt like old times. But then she'd come home from a weekend with her dad, and the shift was immediate. "Dad said you're probably stressed, but he knows we can afford it," she'd say, parroting his exact words. He said, "You just worry too much." It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. He was using this trip, this one special thing, for her to prove his point. To prove that he was the generous, reasonable parent, and I was the difficult, stingy one. The trip was no longer about history or friendship or a fun school activity. It was a battlefield, and I was losing her inch by painful inch. She was 3 weeks from the payment deadline and still needed $800. She looked at me with those big, hopeful eyes, and all I could see was his reflection in them. The breaking point wasn't even about A. It was an email from my lawyer. Mark was refusing to compromise on the division of our retirement savings. He wanted 60%. His justification was that I hadn't contributed as much because I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years. 10 years I'd spent raising our child, managing our world so he could build his career. I was looking at a future where I might have to sell my car, a future I didn't recognize and hadn't prepared for. I felt a cold, hard panic rise in my chest. That evening, A came into my room. She was practically vibrating with excitement. My friends and I were planning our roommate groups for the hotel in D, she said, completely oblivious to the fact that our world was on fire around her. That's when I knew I had to do it. I had to make her see reality. I sat her down and told her as calmly as I could that the trip wasn't going to happen. "We can't afford it, honey," I said. "Your father's choices have consequences for all of us." It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was a lesson. It was the truth. The tears started immediately. Huge, gulping sobs. But they didn't look like the tears of a disappointed child. They looked practiced. They were the same tears Mark used whenever he was backed into a corner, the same manipulative waterworks designed to make me feel guilty and cruel. She wasn't just sad about a trip. She was angry she wasn't getting her way. "But Dad said we could," she wailed. "You're just saying no to punish him." Something inside me snapped shut. The part that was soft and patient just broke. "No, Amelia," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I'm saying no because I am the adult who has to pay the bills your father is creating. I will not be helping you with the rest of the money, and I am officially revoking my permission. You are not going." He could play the hero all he wanted. But I had to be the parent. I had to be the one to say no, even if it made her hate me. The next few weeks were a nightmare of stony silence. A would barely look at me. She spent every moment she could on the phone, whispering to her friends or to her father. I knew I was being painted as the evil witch in her story, but I held my ground. This was about more than a trip. It was about respect. It was about reality. Then one afternoon, she came home from school. I heard the front door open and close, but she didn't go to her room. She walked right into the kitchen where I was standing, and she was smiling. A real, genuine smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in months. It was so jarring it made me freeze. "What is it?" I asked. She couldn't contain it. She was beaming. "You're not going to believe it," she said, her voice full of pure joy. "Someone paid the rest of the money for my trip. The school called me into the office. The last $800, it's all paid. I can go." My blood ran cold. It wasn't relief or happiness I felt. It was the icy certainty of a trap springing shut. I knew with the kind of gut-wrenching instinct only a mother has that Mark was behind this. "Who?" I asked, my voice flat. "Who paid for it?" "You don't even know him. It's V's dad." "You know V, the girl I sit with in history. Her dad heard I was having trouble and just paid it." Isn't that amazing? Some people are just so nice. The story was so absurd, so perfectly constructed to be unbelievable, that it could only have come from Mark. V was the girl who had been making snide comments to Amelia about our divorce for months. The idea that her father would suddenly become a charitable benefactor was laughable. It was a lie, a flimsy cover story my ex-husband had created to funnel the money in without me being able to prove it. He got to be the secret hero, the anonymous savior, while I was left looking like the monster who had almost kept her from her dream. It was brilliant. It was cruel. "Amelia, think about it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That doesn't make any sense. It was your father. He went behind my back and paid it, and he made up this ridiculous story so you wouldn't know." Her face fell. The brilliant smile vanished, replaced by that familiar stubborn scowl. "Oh my God," she said, throwing her hands up. "Of course, I knew you'd do this." I knew you would find a way to ruin it and make it about Dad. Why can't you just be happy for me, for once?" "I'm not trying to ruin it," I pleaded. "I'm trying to make you see what he's doing. He's manipulating you. He's making me the enemy." "No," she said, her voice rising. "You're doing that all by yourself." She turned and stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by the life I had built, and felt it all turning to dust. He hadn't just paid the $800. He had bought another piece of my daughter's loyalty, and he'd used my money to do it. A few days later, I came home from a meeting with my lawyer that had left me feeling sick and defeated. As I walked in, I saw an open suitcase on the floor of the hallway. Amelia was pulling clothes out of her closet and folding them. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. She didn't look at me. She just kept folding a sweater. "I'm going to live with Dad," she said, her voice clipped and distant. "He's coming to get me in an hour." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. This was it. The final move in his game. He'd won. "You can't do that," I said, the words coming out as a choked whisper. "This is your home. We haven't even settled anything with the lawyers." She finally looked up and her eyes were hard. "I don't care. I can't live here anymore. It's too stressful." Stressful, I laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. "You think this is stressful for you? Try having the man you built a life with systematically tear it down and turn your own child against you. He planned this, Amelia. The trip, the money, all of it. It was all a setup to get you to do this." "He's the only one who listens to me," she shouted, her voice cracking. "He's the only one who cares about what I want. You just want to control everything." "I want to protect you," I screamed back, the months of frustration and fear finally boiling over. "From him, he is poisoning you against me, and you're just letting him." Then she said the words. The words I knew weren't hers, the ones that had been polished and fed to her like a script. "Dad said you'd be like this. He said you have a narcissistic rage when you don't get your way. He said you'd try to make me feel guilty." His words. His diagnosis. Coming from my daughter's mouth. In that moment, I didn't see Amelia. I saw him. I saw his smug, condescending face. I saw his lawyers. I saw the last 20 years of my life being repackaged as a lie. All the stress, the betrayal, the constant dizzying, gaslighting, it all exploded inside me. It wasn't a thought. It was just a reaction. A raw, animalistic impulse. I raised my hand and I struck her across the face. The sound of it was sharp and ugly in the quiet house. We both froze, stunned. The red mark bloomed on her cheek instantly. Her eyes wide with shock and fear, filled with tears. This time they weren't manipulative. They were real. And they were because of me. A wave of absolute horror washed over me. I had become the monster he told her I was. "Ames, I started, my hand trembling as I reached for her. She flinched back like I was a wild animal. "Don't touch me," she sobbed, and ran to her room, slamming and locking the door. I heard her on the phone, her voice frantic and broken, telling him to come. Now. I I just stood there, paralyzed by shame. The fight was over. He had engineered this moment for months, pushing and pushing until I finally broke, and now he had his proof. I had done the one thing I could never take back. When Mark arrived, he didn't even look at me. He walked straight to her room, spoke to her in a low, comforting voice, and then emerged with her and her suitcase. She kept her face turned away from me, her eyes fixed on the floor. He paused at the front door and finally looked at me, not with anger, but with a look of cold, clinical pity. It was worse than any rage he could have shown. It was the look of a man who had just been proven right. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," he said simply, and then they were gone. The door clicked shut, leaving me in a house that was suddenly overwhelmingly silent. They went to Washington. I saw the pictures online a week later, posted by her friends. Amelia, smiling in front of the Lincoln Memorial, her arm around her dad. They looked so happy. A perfect father-daughter duo starting their new life. He got everything he wanted. The daughter, the moral high ground, the victory. I was left with an empty house filled with memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. I was left with the bills, the legal fees, and the label he had so carefully crafted for me. The crazy, unstable ex-wife. The narcissistic, abusive mother who deserved to be left all alone. And the worst part is in that one horrible, unforgivable moment, I handed him the proof myself.